After 18 years of marriage, my wife lawyer served me papers at my own office. She gets everything, including full custody. He gloated, leaning over my mahogany desk with a shark-like grin. Your children do not even want your name anymore. They signed the petition this morning. I felt my heart stop, but my face remained like stone. I simply smiled, opened my top drawer, and handed him a sealed, yellowed envelope. Deliver this to your client, I said softly. Tell her to look at page 3 first. By that evening, my phone did not ring with my wife's voice. It exploded with a call from her mother screaming in absolute terror. How could you possibly know our 18-year-old secret? My name is Isaiah Freeman, though everyone in this city has known me as Zeke for 50 years. I am 75 years old, a retired structural engineer who built half the skylines in this state. I know about load-bearing walls, I know about stress fractures, and I know exactly how much pressure it takes to bring a building down. But nothing I ever built prepared me for the demolition my family planned for me. Before I tell you how I brought their house of cards down, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments if you have ever been underestimated by the people you fed and clothed. It helps to know I am not alone in this fight. It was a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of gray, rainy Tuesday that makes your joints ache when you get to my age. I was in my private office at the firm I founded, looking over the blueprints for a new community center in the South Ward. The office was my sanctuary. It smelled of old paper drafting ink and the expensive cigars I only smoked when a project was finished. The silence was heavy, peaceful, until the door flew open without a knock. A young white man walked in. He could not have been more than 30. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car, but it fit him poorly, like he was playing dress-up. This was Miller. I knew his reputation. He was the kind of lawyer who chased ambulances and ruined families for sport. He did not introduce himself. He did not offer a hand. He simply walked up to my desk and tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass surface. The sound of the heavy paper hitting the desk echoed like a gunshot in the quiet room. "You have been served," Mr. Freeman Miller said, his voice dripping with that unearned confidence that only the young and foolish possess. I did not flinch. I slowly took off my reading glasses, folded them, and placed them on top of the blueprints. I looked at the cover sheet. Petition for divorce. Plaintiff Vanessa Freeman. Defendant Isaiah Freeman. I looked up at him. My voice was calm, the deep rumble of a man who has shouted over jackhammers and cranes his whole life. You could have mailed this, son. Miller laughed, a dry, humorless sound. And missed the look on your face. No chance. Vanessa wanted me to make sure you understood the terms immediately. She is not playing games, Zeke. I pulled the file closer. My eyes scanned the legal jargon, picking out the numbers. They were staggering. Vanessa was asking for 80% of my assets. She wanted the main house in the suburbs. She wanted the vacation condo in Miami. She wanted unlimited alimony. She wanted my pension. It was a robbery list, not a divorce settlement. She wants me to vacate the marital home in 24 hours, I read aloud, my finger tracing the line. On what grounds? Mental cruelty, Miller said, leaning forward, placing his knuckles on my desk. She claims you are controlling, that you have created a hostile environment, that she fears for her safety. I almost laughed. Controlling, I was the man who paid for her master degree. I was the man who funded her boutique business that never made a profit. I was the man who hired nurses for her mother Betty when she claimed she was sick. I gave Vanessa a life of leisure while I continued to work well past retirement age because I wanted my family to have the best. This is fiction, I said, closing the folder. It will never stand up in court. Miller smirked. He looked like a man holding a royal flush. Oh, it will stand up. Because we have character witnesses. We have neighbors. And most importantly, we have your sons. The mention of Dante and Darius made my stomach turn. My twin boys, my pride, my joy. They were 17 years old, just months away from manhood. I had taught them to throw a spiral in the backyard. I had taught them how to tie a tie. I had stayed up with them when they had fevers. What about my sons, I asked, and for the first time my voice was not steady. Miller pulled another document from his briefcase. He held it up like a trophy. This is a petition for a legal name change. Dante and Darius signed it this morning. They do not want to be Freemans anymore, Zeke. They are taking their mother maiden name. They do not want to be associated with a man like you. The air left the room. It felt as if a steel beam had fallen on my chest. My name, Freeman. It was not just a name. It was a legacy. My grandfather chose that name when he walked off a plantation in Alabama. My father carried that name into the steel mills of Pittsburgh. I carried that name into universities that did not want me there. I built this company on that name. And now my own sons, the boys, I bounced on my knee, wanted to throw it in the trash like a wrapper. Miller saw the pain in my eyes. He fed on it. It is over, old man. Sign the papers. Give her what she wants, or we will drag you through a public trial that will destroy whatever reputation you have left. You have 24 hours to get out of the house. If you are still there tomorrow at noon, the sheriff will remove you. I looked at Miller. I looked at his arrogant smile, his expensive watch, his disdain for a man he clearly thought was past his prime. He saw an old black man defeated. He did not see the engineer. He did not see the man who calculated risk for a living. He did not know that I never enter a room without knowing where the exit is, and I never build a structure without knowing where the weak points are. I sat back in my leather chair. The leather creaked. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of my office, grounding myself. The pain of my son's betrayal was a physical weight, sharp and hot, but I pushed it down. I locked it away in a cold, dark room in my mind. There would be time to grieve later. Now was the time for war. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk. It was locked, but I kept the key on a chain in my vest pocket. I unlocked it and reached all the way to the back, past the checkbooks, past the old contracts. I pulled out a single manila envelope. It was sealed with heavy tape. It looked old because it was. I had held on to this envelope for 18 years. I placed it gently on the glass desk and slid it across to Miller. "What is this?" Miller asked, looking at it suspiciously. "A counteroffer." I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man watching a demolition charge countdown. "Something like that," I said. "You give that to Vanessa. Tell her I said to look at page 3 first." Miller picked it up. He weighed it in his hand. It was light, but we both knew that sometimes the lightest things carry the most weight. "Is this a joke?" he asked. "Deliver it," I said, my voice dropping an octave. "Or do not. But if you walk out of here without that envelope, tell your client that I will release the contents to the press tomorrow morning instead of the judge." Miller hesitated. He saw something in my eyes that scared him. He saw the steel. He shoved the envelope into his briefcase, sneered at me one last time, and turned to leave. "Noon tomorrow. Zeke," he called out over his shoulder, "pack your bags." When the door closed, the silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was heavy with the ghosts of the last 18 years. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city I helped build. I saw the bridges, I saw the towers, I saw the concrete and the glass. I had built so many things that would last for a century, but my family was made of sand. I left the office early. I did not go home. I knew Vanessa would have changed the locks by now. I knew if I went there, I would likely lose my temper, and that would play right into their hands. They wanted me to be the angry, violent husband. I would not give them that satisfaction. I drove to a small diner on the outskirts of town, ordered a black coffee, and waited. I checked my watch. Miller would be at Vanessa House by now. He would be handing her the envelope. She would be laughing, thinking it was a desperate plea for reconciliation. She would open it. I took a sip of the bitter coffee. At 7:30 in the evening, my phone began to vibrate on the Formica table. I looked at the screen. It was not Vanessa. It was not Miller. It was Betty, my mother-in-law. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I wanted her to sweat. I wanted her to feel the fear gripping her throat. I answered on the 4th ring. I did not say hello. I just listened. Isaiah Betty screamed. Her voice was shrill, panicked, completely stripping away her usual mask of Southern gentility. "What have you done?" I took another sip of coffee. "I did not do anything, Betty. I just returned some paperwork." "You monster!" she shrieked. How could you possibly have that? That clinic was supposed to destroy those records. That was 18 years ago." I leaned back in the booth. The diner was noisy, filled with the clatter of plates and the murmur of conversation, but I felt like I was the only person in the world. "People talk, Betty," I said calmly, "especially when you do not pay them enough to keep quiet." "You cannot use that," she yelled, and I could hear her hyperventilating. "You cannot. It will ruin everything." It will ruin Vanessa. It will ruin the boys. The boys, I said, feeling the cold anger rising again. You mean the boys who signed a paper today saying they do not want my name? They are just children, Betty cried. They do not know. They are 17. Betty, they are men, and they made a choice. Now listen to me very carefully. I paused. I let the silence stretch until I could hear her weeping on the other end. Tell your daughter to call off her dog. Tell her to fire Miller, and tell her I am coming home tonight. If the locks are changed, I will remove the door. I designed the frame, Betty. I know exactly where the hinges are. If I am not inside my own house by 9 o'clock, I send copies of what is in that envelope to every news station in the state. Isaiah, please, she begged. 9 o'clock. Betty, I hung up the phone and placed it face down on the table. My hand was trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally, after 18 years of blindness, seeing the world exactly as it was. I left a $20 bill on the table for a $2 coffee and walked out into the night air. I was going home, and for the first time in a long time, I knew exactly who was waiting for me. They thought they were dealing with a senile old man who would go quietly into the night. They forgot that before I was a husband, before I was a father, I was a man who survived the streets of Chicago in the 60s. I knew how to fight dirty, and tonight I was going to teach them a lesson about structural integrity. If the foundation is rotten, the whole house comes down. I drove my old black Cadillac through the driving rain, the wipers counting time like a metronome. 18 years. That was the number that kept cycling through my mind. 18 years of playing the fool. 18 years of sleeping next to a woman who viewed me not as a husband, but as a long-term investment that was taking too long to mature. I remembered the night we met. It was a charity gala in Atlanta. I was 57, a widower who had buried himself in blueprints and concrete to forget the silence of an empty house. Vanessa was 24. She wore a red dress that seemed to catch every light in the room. She walked up to me and asked about the structural integrity of the suspension bridge I had just completed. She did not talk about money. She did not talk about parties. She talked about tension and compression. She told me she had an old soul. She told me she preferred the wisdom of a mature man to the games of boys her age. I believed her. God help me, I wanted to believe her. I thought I had found a second spring in the winter of my life. I did not see the predator behind the perfume. I did not see that she was not looking at me. She was looking at the portfolio, the assets, the safety net I had woven from 50 years of hard labor. I was not a lover to her. I was a retirement plan. I pulled into the driveway of the house I built. It was a masterpiece of modern colonial architecture, brick and stone, solid enough to withstand a hurricane. But a house is only as strong as the people living in it, and this house was filled with termites. I walked up the stone path, the rain soaking my trench coat. I reached for the door handle and punched my code into the electronic keypad. Access denied. The red light blinked at me, mocking me. I tried again. Access denied. Vanessa had been busy. She had changed the codes. She probably changed the locks on the back doors too. She wanted me to stand out here in the rain to bang on the door like a desperate old man so the neighbors could call the police and she could add another line to her restraining order application. I did not knock. I did not shout. I simply reached into my pocket and pulled out a small magnetic tool. I designed this entryway. I knew that behind the decorative brass plate on the frame there was a manual override mechanism, a fail-safe I installed for emergencies. I slid the plate to the side, inserted the tool, and turned. The heavy oak door clicked. The lock disengaged with a heavy, satisfying thud. I pushed the door open and stepped into the warmth of the foyer. The smell of rosemary and roasted chicken hit me. It was the smell of a family dinner. It was the smell of a home that was functioning perfectly fine without me. I hung my wet coat on the rack. I wiped my shoes on the mat. I walked down the hallway to the dining room. They were all there. Vanessa sat at the foot of the table. Dante and Darius, my twin boys, sat on either side. They were laughing at something on a phone. The crystal chandelier I bought in Italy cast a warm glow over their faces. For a second, just a split second, I wanted to turn around. I wanted to leave them to their illusion. I wanted to spare myself the pain of what was about to happen. But then Vanessa looked up. Her smile vanished. Her fork clattered onto her plate. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking pale and ghostly under the makeup. "How did you get in?" she whispered. "I changed the codes." The twins looked up. Dante and Darius. They were big boys now, 6 feet tall, athletic with the arrogance of youth that has never known a day of hunger. They looked at me, and I searched their eyes for any trace of the toddlers I had carried on my shoulders. I looked for the boys I had taught to fish. I found nothing. Their eyes were cold, filled with a hate that had been carefully cultivated drop by drop over years of poison whispered in their ears by their mother. "I built this house, Vanessa," I said, my voice calm and level. "You cannot lock the architect out of his own creation." I walked to the head of the table. My chair was empty. A place setting was not laid for me. I went to the sideboard, took a plate and silverware. I walked back to the head of the table, pulled out my chair and sat down. "Get out," Darius spat. He gripped his steak knife tight. "You are not wanted here." I ignored him. I reached for the serving platter of roast chicken. My hand was steady, though my heart was breaking into 1,000 jagged pieces. I served myself a piece of chicken. I scooped some potatoes. I poured myself a glass of water from the pitcher. Vanessa began to tremble. It was a performance, of course. She started to hyperventilate, clutching her chest, looking at the boys with wide, terrified eyes. "He is going to hurt me," she whimpered. "Look at him. He is crazy," he broke in. "Boys, please, I am scared." It was a master class in manipulation. She knew exactly which buttons to push. She knew that young men want to be protectors. She was turning them into weapons. I cut a piece of chicken and put it in my mouth. I chewed slowly. I swallowed. "This is good," I said. "A bit dry, but good." "Why are you doing this?" Vanessa shrieked, her voice rising to a hysterical pitch. "You received the papers. You have 24 hours. Get out." I put my fork down. I looked at her. I looked at the woman I had clothed in silk and diamonds. "I am eating dinner in my house with my family," I said. "Is that a crime?" Dante stood up. He was the bigger of the two, a linebacker on the varsity team. He loomed over me, his shadow falling across my plate. He was vibrating with adrenaline and misguided rage. "Mom said, 'Get out,'" Dante growled. "Sit down, son," I said, not looking up. "You do not want to do this." "Do not call me son," he yelled. "My name is Dante Miller. I am not a Freeman. I never was." The words hit me harder than any fist. Miller, her maiden name. They had already erased me. "Make him leave!" "Dante," Vanessa cried out. "He is tormenting me." Dante moved. It happened fast. He reached out, grabbed the lapels of my suit jacket, and hauled me out of the chair. I was 75 years old. I was strong, but I was not a match for a 17-year-old athlete fueled by rage. He shoved me. Hard. I stumbled back. My hip hit the sideboard with a sickening crunch. I lost my footing and fell to the hardwood floor. The pain shot up my spine, white and hot. My glasses skittered across the room. For a moment, there was silence. Absolute terrified silence. I lay on the floor looking up at the ceiling I had plastered myself. I looked at the crown molding I had installed. I looked at the son who had just put his hands on his father. Dante stood there, his chest heaving, his fists clenched. He looked down at me, and for a fleeting second I saw regret. I saw the boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee. But then he looked at his mother and the mask slammed back down. "Get up," Dante said, his voice shaking. "Get up and get out, you old dictator. We do not need you. We have Mom. We do not need your money or your rules." Vanessa stood up then. She walked over to Dante and put a hand on his arm, not to restrain him, but to claim him. She looked down at me with a sneer that twisted her beautiful face into something ugly. "Look at you, Isaiah," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "Look at you. Pathetic. A weak old man on the floor. This is where you belong. You thought you could control us forever. You thought you could buy us. It is over." I slowly pushed myself up. My joints screamed. My hip burned. I grabbed the edge of the dining table and hauled myself to my feet. I brushed the dust off my trousers. I adjusted my jacket. I did not groan. I did not cry out. I would not give them the satisfaction of hearing my pain. I walked over to where my glasses had landed. I picked them up, inspected them for cracks, and put them back on my face. The room came back into sharp focus. I looked at the three of them, a tableau of betrayal. The unfaithful wife, the ungrateful sons. "You are right, Dante," I said. My voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried through the room like a draft from a tomb. "You do not need me." I looked at Vanessa. She was still sneering, confident in her victory. She thought she had won. She thought the physical humiliation was the end of the battle. She did not know it was just the signal for the airstrike. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, Vanessa, I said. She laughed, a cruel, sharp sound. Oh, please. What are you going to do? Hit me. You do not have the guts. Go cry to your lawyer. I walked to the door. I paused with my hand on the handle. I did not look back. You think that envelope I gave Miller was everything I asked? Vanessa froze. Her laughter died in her throat. You think that one receipt was the whole story? I continued. That was just the table of contents, Vanessa. That was just a polite hello. I opened the door. The cold night air rushed in. Enjoy your dinner, I said. It is the last meal you will ever eat in this house. I stepped out into the rain and pulled the door shut behind me. The lock clicked. I walked down the path to my car. My hip was throbbing with every step, a dull, grinding agony that made me grit my teeth. But my mind was clear. Crystal clear. The ambiguity was gone. The hope was gone. The lingering affection that had stayed my hand for so long was dead killed on the dining room floor. They wanted a war. They wanted a villain. They wanted a dictator. Fine. I got into my Cadillac and started the engine. I checked my phone. There was a message from Brad, my son-in-law. It was a single image. A bank confirmation. The asset freeze was ready to execute. I put the car in gear and drove away from the house I built. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I was done looking back. The past was dead, and tomorrow I was going to bury it. The rain was coming down harder now, hammering against the roof of my Cadillac like 1,000 tiny fists, demanding entry. I drove through the blurred streets of the city I had helped build, my hip throbbing in rhythm with the windshield wipers. Every bump in the road sent a jolt of white-hot agony up my spine, a cruel reminder of the dining room floor and the son who had put me there. I was 75 years old, exiled from my own castle, fleeing into the night like a criminal. I pulled into the driveway of a modest, sturdy brick house in the north suburbs. The porch light was on a beacon of warmth in the cold, wet darkness. This was Keisha's house. My eldest daughter. My firstborn. The only person in my life who had looked at Vanessa 18 years ago and seen the wolf beneath the sheep's clothing. I struggled out of the car, my movements stiff and jerky. Before I could even reach the steps, the front door flew open. Brad, my son-in-law, stepped out under the overhang. He was a big man, a former FBI agent turned private investigator with the kind of pale, weathered face that gave away nothing but saw everything. He didn't say a word. He just walked down the steps into the rain, took my arm and supported my weight. His grip was firm, respectful, the grip of a man who knew what it meant to hold the line when everything else was falling apart. We walked into the foyer and the smell of cinnamon and old books wrapped around me. It was the smell of safety. Keisha was standing by the stairs, her arms crossed her face, a mask of worry and vindication. She was 50 years old with her mother's high cheekbones and my stubborn set of the jaw. She looked at my wet coat, my limp, the exhaustion etched into every line of my face. "Daddy," she whispered, the hardness melting from her eyes. I tried to stand tall, but the pain in my hip buckled my knee. Brad caught me before I could fall. "She threw us out, Keisha," I said, my voice raspy. "You were right. You were right about everything. 18 years ago you told me. You told me she was a gold digger. You told me she didn't love me, and I was too vain to listen. I was an old fool who wanted to believe a beautiful young woman found him fascinating. Keisha didn't say I told you so. She didn't have to. She just walked over and hugged me, burying her face in my damp shoulder. "I am just glad you are alive, Daddy," she said fiercely. "I have been terrified for 6 months, ever since you told Brad to start watching her." "Come on, Zeke," Brad said gently. "Let's get you dry. We have work to do." 30 minutes later, I was sitting in Brad's study, wrapped in a dry robe, a glass of bourbon in my hand. The study was lined with filing cabinets and monitors. It was the nerve center of Brad's operation. He sat behind his desk, not as a family member, but as a professional. He placed a thick black binder on the desk. The label read simply, VF. I took a sip of the bourbon. It burned, going down, cauterizing the wound in my chest. I nodded at the file. "Open it." Brad flipped the cover. "We have been tracking her for 6 months. Zeke, just like you asked." Brad began, his voice clinical. "We knew she was cheating. That was the easy part. We have photos of her with at least 3 different men in the last year. But that is not the headline, that is just the distraction." He pulled out a series of bank statements. They were not from my bank, they were from a bank in the Cayman Islands. "She has been siphoning funds," Brad said. It started small, 5,000 here, 10,000 there. Consultancies for her boutique, renovations that never happened. But in the last 2 years, she got bold. She has been liquidating assets you didn't even know were liquid. I leaned forward, squinting at the numbers. How I asked. I checked the books. I am the one who signs the checks. Brad pulled out another sheet. It was a power of attorney document. It had my signature on it. A perfect forgery. She forged your signature, Zeke. She created a shell company under the name Structural Dynamics LLC, almost identical to your firm's subsidiary. She has been billing your own company for phantom consulting services and funneling the money offshore. We are looking at nearly $3 million, Zeke. Gone. $3 million. That was the retirement fund. That was the legacy for the boys. The boys, I muttered. They think she is a saint. They think I am the villain who controls the purse strings. Brad looked at me, his blue eyes serious. The boys are victims too, Zeke. They have been gaslighted since they were in diapers. But we have something that might shake them up, or at least it will destroy her credibility in court. He reached into the back of the folder and pulled out a copy of the document I had given to Miller, the lawyer, just hours ago. The document that was inside the yellow envelope. It was a receipt from a private medical clinic in Georgia. It was dated 18 years and 7 months ago. You gave this to Miller? Brad asked. I nodded. I found it in her jewelry box a month after we got married. I kept it. I don't know why. Maybe deep down even then I knew I would need insurance. Keisha leaned over the desk looking at the paper. What is it? It is an invoice for a termination of pregnancy, Brad said quietly. An abortion. Keisha looked up confused. But the twins. They were born 8 months after you got married. The timing. Exactly, I said, my voice cold. Vanessa came to me 18 years ago and told me she was pregnant. She said it was a miracle. She said she was 2 months along. We got married in a rush because of it. But this receipt is dated 1 month before she told me that. I looked at my daughter. I looked at the man who had been more of a son to me than my own flesh and blood. If she terminated a pregnancy in Georgia 1 month before she claimed to be pregnant with my children, then the math does not work, I said. She wasn't pregnant with my children when we married. She got pregnant again immediately, or she was never pregnant by you at all. Brad finished the thought. The silence in the room was heavy. It was the silence of a bridge collapsing, the sound of steel snapping under too much weight. We need a DNA test, Keisha said, her voice trembling with rage. We need to prove those boys aren't yours. If they aren't yours, Zeke, then the whole marriage was based on paternity fraud. It gets worse, Brad said. He pulled up a photo on his computer monitor. It was a grainy image taken with a telephoto lens. It showed Vanessa meeting with a man in a park. The man was white, tall, with thinning hair and a face that looked like it had been punched a few too many times. Who is that, I asked. His name is Ray Miller, Brad said. No relation to her lawyer. He is a con artist. He did time in Georgia for check fraud around the time you met Vanessa. We found records of phone calls between them, hundreds of them, starting 6 months ago. Ray Miller. The name meant nothing to me, but the way Vanessa was leaning towards him in the photo, the familiarity, it made my skin crawl. Is he the father, Keisha whispered. I don't know, I said, but I am going to find out. And if he is, then Dante and Darius. My God. My phone buzzed on the desk, vibrating violently against the wood. It startled all of us. I looked at the screen. It was a notification from my email. A priority alert from the court system. I picked up the phone. My hands were steady now, hardened by the revelations. I opened the email. It was a PDF attachment, an ex parte order of protection. I read the summary. The world tilted on its axis. Vanessa Freeman has been granted an emergency restraining order against Isaiah Freeman, I read aloud. She claims that tonight at approximately 7:30 p.m., I broke into the marital home, physically assaulted her son Dante, and threatened to kill her. She has submitted photos of bruises on her arm and a statement from Dante corroborating the assault. Fake Brad spat. Dante assaulted you. We saw the bruise on your hip. It does not matter, I said, staring at the screen. The judge signed it. It is effective immediately. I cannot go within 500 feet of the house. I cannot contact her. I cannot contact the boys. And then the realization hit me. A cold, paralyzing fear that had nothing to do with money or reputation. My pills, I whispered. Keisha looked at me sharp. What pills, Daddy? My heart medication, I said. The nitroglycerin. The beta blockers. I left them on the nightstand. I have not taken my evening dose. Brad stood up immediately. I will go get them. I will call the police escort. You can't. I said. The order covers third parties acting on my behalf. If you go there, they will say, I sent you to harass them. They will have me arrested for violating the order. But you need them, Keisha cried. You have a heart condition. That is the point, I said, looking at the black binder at the evidence of 18 years of lies. Don't you see? She knows I need them. She knows I cannot come back. She is not just trying to steal my money, Keisha. I looked my daughter in the eye and saw the dawn of horror in her face. She is trying to kill me. She wants the stress to stop my heart so she doesn't have to split the assets in a divorce. She wants to be a widow, not an ex-wife. I stood up, ignoring the pain in my hip. The room seemed to shrink. The air felt thin. Call the pharmacy, I told Brad. See if you can get an emergency refill. But do not go to that house. That house is a death trap. As Brad reached for the phone, I walked to the window and looked out at the rain. I thought about Dante and Darius. I thought about the man in the park, Ray Miller. I thought about the $3 million in the Cayman Islands. They wanted me dead. My wife. My children. They wanted the old engineer to crumble so they could sell the scrap metal. I touched the cold glass of the window. I am not crumbling, I whispered to the reflection of the old black man in the glass. I am reinforcing. And when I am done, there won't be a stone left standing on their side of the fence. The flashing blue lights of the police cruiser cut through the darkness of Keisha's living room, painting the walls in spasms of neon violence. It was 11 o'clock at night. I sat in the armchair, my hip throbbing a dull, constant rhythm, watching the rain streak the window pane. I did not need to look outside to know who was there. I knew the procedure. I knew the law. When a judge signs a piece of paper declaring a man dangerous, the state sends its enforcers to strip him of his claws. Brad opened the door. 2 officers stood on the porch, water dripping from the brims of their hats. One was young white with a jaw square enough to break bricks. The other was older black with tired eyes that met mine across the room. He knew. I could see it in his stance. He knew he was about to humiliate an elder, a man who had built half the bridges this city drove over. But he had his orders, Mr. Freeman, the older officer said, stepping into the foyer. I am Sergeant Vance. We are here to serve a temporary restraining order. I stood up. It took effort. My joints were stiff, locking up from the stress and the fall earlier that night. I walked to the door, my posture straight, my chin held high. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me broken. I understand, Sergeant, I said. My voice was calm, a deep rumble that seemed to surprise the younger officer. You are required to surrender any firearms in your possession, Vance said, his hand resting instinctively near his belt. The order mandates the immediate removal of all weapons. I felt a cold stone settle in my stomach. I had owned a Colt 1911 for 40 years. It was a collector's piece kept in a lockbox, cleaned every Sunday, never fired in anger. It was not just a gun. It was a symbol. It was the guarantee that I could protect my home. Now, because of a lie told by a woman who had never worked a day in her life, I was being disarmed like a common criminal. It is in the trunk of my car, I said, in a locked case. Brad moved to intervene. Officers, Mr. Freeman is a licensed holder. He has never— It is okay, Brad, I interrupted. Do not fight the current. Let it flow. I walked out into the rain with them. I opened the trunk of the Cadillac. The black case sat there glistening under the streetlights. I unlocked it. The steel of the gun was cold and heavy. I handed it to Vance. He took it with both hands, checking the chamber, treating it with a respect that felt like a mockery. Receipt, please, I said. He scribbled on a notepad and handed me the slip of paper. It felt light, flimsy. I had traded my protection for a scrap of carbon paper. Stay away from the residence, Mr. Freeman Vance said, his voice softening slightly. 500 feet. No contact. If you violate this, we will arrest you. Do you understand? I understand, I said. They got back in their cruiser and drove away, the lights fading into the wet night. I stood there for a moment, the rain soaking my shirt, feeling a nakedness I had not felt since I was a boy. I was 75 years old. I was homeless. I was weaponless. I was a man stripped down to his bones. I went back inside. Keisha was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her tablet with a look of absolute horror. Brad was standing behind her, his face grim. What is it? I asked, wiping the water from my face. You should not see this, Daddy, Keisha said, trying to turn the screen away. Show me, I commanded. She hesitated, then turned the tablet toward me. It was a live stream. Facebook. Vanessa. She was sitting on the beige sofa in our living room. My living room. The lighting was perfect, soft, and sympathetic. She was wearing a t-shirt I had never seen, old and frayed, making her look vulnerable. Her hair was messy, and there were tears. Great, glistening tears rolling down her cheeks. He just snapped. She sobbed into the camera. The comments were scrolling up the side of the screen so fast they were a blur. "Stay strong, Queen. What a monster. Men are trash. Call the cops." I listened to her lie. I watched her performance. "He has been controlling me for years," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But tonight he broke down the door. He hit our son. He threatened to kill us all. I am so scared. I do not know what he will do next. He is unstable. He is losing his mind. Please, if anyone sees him, call the police." I watched the number of viewers tick up. 500, 1,000, 2,000. The court of public opinion was in session, and the verdict was guilty. My reputation, built brick by brick over 50 years, was being dismantled in minutes by a woman with a smartphone and a talent for fiction. Keisha slammed the tablet face down on the table. "I am going to kill her," she hissed. "I am going to go over there and drag her out by her hair." "No," I said. Brad looked at me. "Zeke, we have to counter this. We need to release a statement. We need to show the medical report of your hip. We need to show the broken lock." "No statement," I said. I walked over to the kitchen island. I poured myself a glass of water. My hand was steady. The anger had burned itself out, leaving behind something colder, harder, something like tempered steel. "Statements are for people who care what the neighbors think," I said. "I do not care about the neighbors. I care about the truth." I looked at Brad. "Open your laptop." He looked confused, but did as I asked. He booted up his rugged field computer. "Connect to the server at my firm," I said. "Use the admin override. Passcode, Jericho." Brad typed it in. "What are we looking for, Zeke?" "Activate camera 4, I said. Brad stopped typing. He looked up at me. "There is no camera 4 on the house schematics. I swept that house for bugs myself 6 months ago." "I know," I said. "Because I installed camera 4 myself 10 years ago. It is not on the network. It is hardwired into the dedicated line I ran for the structural integrity sensors in the master bedroom. It is behind the HVAC vent directly facing the bed." "You have a camera in the bedroom?" Keisha asked, her eyes wide. "I built that house." I said simply, "I monitor the stress loads on the support beams. And sometimes I monitor the stress loads on the marriage." "Turn it on." Brad hit the enter key. The screen flickered static for a second, and then a crisp, high-definition image filled the monitor. It was the master bedroom, my bedroom, the bed I had slept in for 18 years. Vanessa was there, but she was not crying. The tear-stained victim from the live stream was gone. In her place was a woman laughing so hard she had to hold her stomach. She was sitting on the edge of the bed holding a glass of champagne, and she was not alone. Betty was there, my mother-in-law, the woman whose medical bills I had paid, the woman I had treated like a queen. She was sitting at the vanity table, my vanity table surrounded by an array of cosmetics. "Look at this," Betty cackled, pointing at the tablet she was holding. "Look at these comments. They want to lynch him. Someone should put that old dog down. I hope he rots in jail. Oh, this is too easy." Vanessa took a sip of champagne. "Did you see his face, Mama, when Dante pushed him? He looked like a crushed bug. I thought he was going to cry." "He deserved it," Betty spat. "Arrogant old man, thinking he could buy us, thinking he could own us." Brad and Keisha were silent, staring at the screen in disbelief. The cruelty was raw, unfiltered. "Come here, baby," Betty said, waving a makeup brush. "You rubbed off the bruise when you were wiping your fake tears. We need to reapply it before the police come back for a wellness check." Vanessa walked over to the vanity. She sat down, tilting her head back. Betty dipped the brush into a palette of purples and yellows. With the skill of a Hollywood makeup artist, she began to paint a bruise on Vanessa's cheekbone. "Hold still," Betty muttered. "You need to look like he hit you with the back of his hand. Right there. Yes. That looks nasty." Vanessa looked in the mirror and smiled. A cold, predatory smile. "It is perfect. Dr. Evans will have to sign the commitment papers now. Violent outbursts, delusions, physical assault. It is a slam dunk for dementia. I watched them. I watched them paint a crime scene onto her skin. I watched them toast to my destruction. I felt a strange detachment, like I was watching a documentary about a disaster that happened to someone else. "Is the money secure?" Vanessa asked, inspecting her face. "It is moving," Betty said. "The Cayman transfer cleared an hour ago. 3 million. And once we get the power of attorney, we can liquidate the real estate, the house, the building downtown, everything." "What about the boys?" Vanessa asked. Dante seemed shook. Betty scoffed. "Dante is a child. He will get over it when he sees the new car you are going to buy him. He just needs to keep his mouth shut and remember who his real family is." I leaned closer to the screen. My heart was beating slow, heavy thuds against my ribs. "I just wish we didn't have to wait," Vanessa sighed. "I am tired of playing the grieving wife. I want to spend it. I want to go to Paris. I want to be free of him. Patience." "Honey," Betty said, finishing the bruise with a dusting of powder. "He is 75. His heart is garbage. Without his pills, with this stress. He will pop a valve within a week. And if he doesn't..." She paused. She looked directly at Vanessa in the mirror. "If he doesn't die on his own, we will help him along, just like we planned." Keisha gasped. Brad's hand flew to his mouth, but then Betty said something else. Something that froze the blood in my veins and stopped time itself. "Besides," Betty said, wiping the brush on a tissue, "the old fool still thinks those two brats are his blood. He thinks he is fighting for his legacy." Betty laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "Wait until he dies. Wait until the ink is dry on the death certificate. Then we will bring Ray back. Ray has been waiting 18 years to be a father. It is time the boys knew who their real daddy is." Ray. The name hung in the air of Brad's study like a toxic cloud. Ray. The man Brad had found in the photos. The con artist. The ex-con. Ray was the father. I stared at the screen. I looked at the woman I had married, the woman I had slept beside, the woman who had birthed 2 sons that I had raised, loved, and educated. They were not mine. 18 years of lies, 18 years of paternity fraud, every baseball game, every graduation, every fever, every "I love you, Dad." It was all stolen. It was all a performance. My knees gave out. I sank into the chair behind me. The room spun. The grief was not sharp. It was a vast, hollow emptiness, a black hole opening up in the center of my life and swallowing everything I thought I knew. Dante, Darius, my boys. They were not my boys. They were the spawn of a grifter and a thief. "Zeke," Brad asked, his voice sounding far away. "Are you okay?" I stared at the monitor, at the 2 women laughing in my bedroom. "Who is Ray?" Keisha whispered, tears streaming down her face. I closed my eyes. I saw the faces of the twins. I saw their eyes, which I had always told myself looked like my mother's. I saw their height, which I attributed to my grandfather. I saw the deception woven into their very DNA. "Ray," I said, my voice sounding like grinding stones. "Ray is the man we are going to find." I opened my eyes. The weakness was gone. The grief was locked away in the vault. "Brad," I said, "get the facial recognition software running. Run the photo from the park against the Georgia Department of Corrections database. Find Ray Miller. Find him tonight." "But Zeke," Brad said, "the money, the restraining order." "Forget the money," I said. "Forget the order. This isn't about money anymore. This is about blood. They made me raise another man's sons to kill me." I stood up. I walked to the map of the city on the wall. "Find Ray," I commanded. "Because Ray is the key. Ray is the loose thread. And I am going to pull that thread until their entire tapestry unravels and chokes them to death." 2 weeks. That was the timeline the judge had given us. 14 days until the preliminary hearing where a stranger in a black robe would decide if I lost my home, my assets, and my dignity permanently. 14 days to find a ghost named Ray Miller and drag him into the light. The clock was not just ticking, it was hammering against my skull like a rivet gun. Brad and I set up a war room in his basement. It smelled of ozone from the servers and stale coffee. We were running on adrenaline and caffeine. Brad had called in every favor he had from his days at the bureau. He was working the phones, his voice low and urgent, speaking a language of codes and contacts that I did not speak. I sat at a folding table reviewing the financial wreckage of my life. We hit the first wall at 9 in the morning on Wednesday. I need to buy access to the Georgia criminal database, Brad said, typing furiously. It is a third-party vendor, $500. I pulled out my wallet. It was an old leather thing molded to the shape of my hip over 20 years. I pulled out my black card, the one with the high limit, the one I used to buy materials for skyscrapers. Use this, I said, sliding it across the table. Brad took it. He typed in the numbers. He hit enter. He frowned. He typed it again. He hit enter again. Zeke, he said, his voice hesitant. It is declined. Try it again, I said. That card has a $50,000 limit. It is not the limit, Zeke. The account is frozen. I felt a coldness spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the basement temperature. I pulled out my phone. I logged into my banking app. Account frozen. Contact branch. I checked the savings. Frozen. I checked the investment portfolio. Frozen. Vanessa. She had moved fast. Her lawyer Miller had filed an emergency motion to freeze marital assets to prevent dissipation. The judge had signed it without even asking me a question. They had locked me out of the house, and now they had locked me out of my life's work. I had millions of dollars in net worth, but I could not buy a cup of coffee. She is trying to starve us out, I said, staring at the red letters on the screen. She knows investigations cost money. She knows lawyers cost money. She wants me to show up to court with empty pockets and a court-appointed attorney. I can cover it, Zeke, Brad said, immediately reaching for his own wallet. Keisha and I have savings. No, I said. My voice was sharp. I will not drag my daughter into debt. This is my war. I will fund it. How, Brad asked. The banks are closed to you. I stood up. My hip popped, a sharp reminder of the violence in my own dining room. I walked to the corner of the basement where I had stacked the few boxes of personal effects I had kept at Keisha's house over the years. Things Vanessa had deemed too ugly or too old for our pristine mansion. I pushed aside a box of old blueprints and found what I was looking for. It was a rusted, dented iron lunchbox. It still had a faint smell of coal dust and machine oil. It was the lunchbox I had carried when I worked the mines in West Virginia 30 years ago, before I started the firm, before I wore suits, before I became a man who could be robbed by a signature on a piece of paper. I carried the heavy box to the table and set it down. The metal clanged against the wood. What is that? Brad asked. I opened the latch. It groaned with rust. Inside, wrapped in oily rags, were heavy yellow bars. Gold, I said. Brad's eyes went wide. 30 years ago, when I was working the mines, I did not trust banks. I explained. I did not trust the government. And I definitely did not trust the economy. Every payday I bought a little bit, an ounce here, an ounce there. When I started making real money with the firm, I kept the habit. I bought bullion, I buried it, I forgot about it. I unwrapped one of the bars. It caught the light of the computer monitors, glowing with a dull, heavy promise. Cash leaves a trail, I said. Cash can be frozen by a judge who has never worked a day of hard labor in his life. Gold has no name. Gold has no account number. Gold is the only language the world truly understands. There must be $50,000 here, Brad whispered. More, I said. Enough to find Ray Miller. Enough to burn their whole world down. Take it to the pawn shop on 4th Street. Ask for Sal. Tell him Zeke sent you. He will give you 70% of spot value in cash, no questions asked. Brad looked at me with a new level of respect. He took 2 of the bars and nodded. I will be back in an hour. When Brad returned, he had a thick envelope of cash. We paid the vendor, we paid the informants, and then the information started to flow. Ray Miller. The name came up on the screen, accompanied by a mugshot that was 10 years old. He was white, 45 years old. In the photo, he had a smirk that looked like he knew a joke nobody else did. His eyes were hard, the eyes of a man who looked at people and saw targets. Here is the history, Brad said, scrolling through the rap sheet. Check fraud in Savannah, identity theft in Macon, grand larceny in Atlanta. He did a 5-year stretch in state prison. Look at the dates, I said, pointing at the screen. He was released 18 years ago, Brad said. 3 months before you met Vanessa. The timeline fit like a steel beam into a rivet. Vanessa gets an abortion in Georgia. Ray gets out of prison in Georgia. Vanessa moves to this city. She meets me. She gets pregnant again. He was her pimp, I said, the realization tasting like bile in my throat. Or her partner. They ran a long con. She was the bait. I was the mark. And the twins were the anchor that kept me here. But where is he now? Brad asked. He fell off the grid 3 years ago. No credit cards, No address. He is here, I said. I felt it in my bones. He is close. Vanessa is not smart enough to do this alone. She needs a handler. Check the phone records again, I commanded. Look for burner phones. Look for recurring numbers in the vicinity of the house. Brad worked through the night. I sat in the armchair watching the data stream, feeling the weight of the gold bars remaining in the lunchbox. I was tired. My body was old, but my mind was sharpening, honing itself on the whetstone of betrayal. At 4 a.m, Brad hit the table with his fist. Got him, he said. I leaned over his shoulder. He is not using a phone registered to him, Brad said. He is using a phone registered to a shell company. Vandalay Industries. I snorted. A Seinfeld reference. They were mocking me. Trace the address, I said. Brad typed. The map zoomed in. It settled on a building downtown. The Spire. I knew the Spire. I had consulted on the foundation work. It was one of the most expensive, exclusive residential towers in the city. Penthouses there went for $10,000 a month. He is living in the Spire, I asked, incredulous. A career grifter with no job is living in a luxury high-rise. Brad pulled up the lease agreement. It was digital hacked from the management company's server. Look at the guarantor, Brad said. I looked. The name was there in black and white pixels. Vanessa Freeman. She was paying for his apartment. She was keeping him in luxury, and she was doing it with checks drawn from the account of Structural Dynamics LLC. My money. I sat back the breath leaving my lungs. It was not just an affair, it was a parasitic infection. She was taking the money I earned from building hospitals and schools, and she was using it to house the man who had sired the children I was raising. They were laughing at me. For 18 years they had been laughing. Is he there now? I asked. Brad checked the location data on the burner phone. Pinged off the tower on 4th and Main 5 minutes ago. He is there. Apartment 402. I stood up. I went to the closet and pulled out my heavy coat. I put my hat on my head. Where are you going? Brad asked, standing up to block my path. You cannot go there, Zeke. If you touch him, you go to jail. That destroys the case. I am not going to touch him, I said. I am just going to look him in the eye. I need to see the man who stole my life. I am coming with you, Brad said. We drove through the pre-dawn city. The streets were empty, slick with rain. The spire rose up like a needle of glass and steel piercing the gray sky. It was a monument to wealth, and inside it lived a rat. We parked down the street. We walked to the entrance. The doorman stopped us, but Brad flashed his PI license and slipped him a $100 bill from the envelope. Money talks, just like I said. We took the elevator to the 4th floor. The hallway smelled of lavender and expensive cleaning products. We found door 402. I did not knock. I just listened. I heard music, jazz, Coltrane. My favorite album. I heard laughter, a woman's laughter. I knew that laugh. I had heard it for 18 years. I had heard it across the dinner table. I had heard it in the bedroom. Vanessa was in there. It was 4 a.m. My wife, who claimed to be terrified of me, who claimed to be a victim of domestic abuse, was in a luxury apartment with a convicted felon listening to my music, spending my money. I reached for the door handle, my hand trembling with a rage so pure it felt like white fire. Zeke, Brad whispered, grabbing my wrist. Don't. If you go in there, you lose. We need the police. We need the camera. We need to do this right. I stared at the door. I imagined kicking it down. I imagined finding them. I imagined the violence I was capable of. But then I thought about Dante and Darius. I thought about the lie that had been their lives. You are right, I whispered. I pulled out my phone. I took a picture of the door number. I recorded the sound of her laughter coming through the wood. We have him, I said, turning away from the door. We found the ghost. We walked back to the elevator. As the doors closed, cutting off the sound of my wife's joy, I felt a strange sense of calm. They were celebrating. They thought they had won. They thought the old man was frozen, locked out, defeated. They did not know that I had just found the structural flaw in their entire foundation, and I had the dynamite in my pocket to blow it all to hell. The Blue Velvet Lounge was the kind of place that charged $20 for a cocktail to keep the riffraff out, but the darkness inside hid the same stains you would find in a dive bar. It was 2 blocks from the Spire. We found Ray Miller in a corner booth nursing a glass of single malt scotch that was older than the twins. He was wearing a suit that looked expensive from a distance but cheap up close, much like the man himself. I walked over to the booth. My hip was a dull fire, but I walked with the rhythm of a pile driver, steady and heavy. Brad peeled off to the side, leaning against the bar, crossing his arms, cutting off the exit. Ray looked up. He did not jump. He did not spill his drink. He just smiled, a slow, lazy curling of the lip that showed too many teeth. Isaiah Freeman. Ray said, his voice smooth like oil on asphalt. I was wondering when you would show up. You look terrible, old man. Rough night, I slid into the booth opposite him. The leather creaked under my weight. I placed my hands on the table, calloused engineer hands next to his manicured grifter hands. Ray Miller, I said. You are living well for a man with no job and a rap sheet longer than my arm. Ray swirled his scotch. I have a benefactor, a very generous woman who appreciates my particular set of skills. I looked at him. I looked for the monster I had built in my mind. But he was just a man, a mediocre, aging man with watery blue eyes and a weak chin, and yet looking at him was like looking into a distorted mirror. I see them in you, I whispered. It was involuntary. The words escaped before I could stop them. Ray laughed. It was a soft, wet sound. Of course you do. Dante and Darius. They are fine boys. Big, strong. They get their height from me. And that temper, that is all Miller blood. The confirmation hit me like a physical blow. I had suspected it. I had calculated the odds. But hearing him say it, hearing him claim ownership of the two human beings I had devoted the last 18 years of my life to was an agony I cannot describe. How I asked. My voice was hollow. Vanessa is light, Ray interrupted, leaning forward. Her mother Betty is light. You know how genetics work, Zeke. You are an engineer. You understand blueprints. Vanessa and I, we fit. We matched. When she got pregnant, we knew there was a risk. The babies could have come out looking like me, or they could have come out looking like her. But you were so desperate for a legacy. You were so desperate to put your stamp on the world. You never even questioned why those boys had hazel eyes. You just told yourself it was some recessive gene from your great-grandmother. He took a sip of his drink, enjoying my pain. You saw what you wanted to see, Zeke, and we let you. I closed my eyes. I saw Dante at 6 years old crying because he struck out at T-ball. I saw myself holding him, wiping his tears, telling him that a Freeman never quits. I saw Darius at 10 showing me his science fair project, his face glowing with pride when I told him he had the mind of an engineer. I had taught them to shave. I had taught them to drive. I had paid for their braces, their tutors, their football camps. I had sat by their bedsides when they had the flu, cooling their foreheads with damp cloths, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in to spare them. I had poured my soul into vessels that belonged to another man. I was the cuckoo bird tricked into raising the predator's young in my own nest. Thank you, by the way, Ray said, breaking my reverie, for raising them. I was in no position to be a father back then. I had legal entanglements. You gave them a great start. Private schools, nice clothes. And now that the heavy lifting is done, I get to step in and enjoy the finished product. You are a parasite, I said. Ray shrugged. I am a survivor. And you are a wallet that is about to be emptied. Vanessa tells me you are stubborn. She says you won't sign the papers. She says we might have to wait until your heart gives out. He looked at his watch. Tick-tock, Zeke. Tick-tock. I looked at this man, this smug, hollow man who thought he had won the lottery. He thought he was the mastermind. He thought Vanessa loved him. He thought he was the end game. He did not know Vanessa, not the way I did. He knew the mistress. I knew the wife. I knew the woman who looked at bank balances the way other women looked at romance novels. I reached into my pocket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a stack of photographs Brad had printed an hour ago. I tossed them onto the table right on top of his napkin. Ray looked down. His smirk faltered. The photos were high resolution. They showed Ray outside a motel in Bankhead. He was with a woman. She was young, maybe 22. She was blonde. She was hanging off his arm, laughing. So what Ray said, trying to recover his composure. I have a life. Vanessa knows I am not a monk, does she? I asked. Does she know you are spending her allowance on this girl? Does she know you bought this girl a Honda Civic last week? We have the title transfer Ray, signed by you. Paid for by Structural Dynamics, LLC. Ray stiffened. Vanessa doesn't care what I do as long as I play my part. I leaned in. My face was inches from his. I let him see the cold, dead anger in my eyes. You think Vanessa is loyal to you? I asked. You think a woman who spent 18 years lying to the man who gave her the world is going to be true to a man who gave her nothing but a lie? Ray swallowed. His Adam's apple bobbed. Vanessa is not leaving you because she loves you, Ray, I hissed. She is leaving me because she wants the money. She wants the $3 million in the Caymans. She wants the house. She wants the freedom. And do you know what the only loose end is? I pointed a finger at his chest. You. You are the liability. You are the ex-con father who can blow up her narrative. You think she's going to share that money with you. You think she's going to let you play happy family with the twins. I reached into my pocket again and pulled out another piece of paper. It was a flight itinerary. Brad had found it 20 minutes ago. This is a flight confirmation, I said. One way. To Paris. For 2 people. Ray snatched the paper. He scanned it. Vanessa Freeman, he read. And Dante Freeman. Darius Freeman. There is no ticket for Ray Miller, I said softly. Ray stared at the paper. His hands began to shake. She is taking the boys, I said. She is taking the money. And she is leaving the country next week. She is cutting you out, Ray. Just like she cut me out. You were just a stud horse. You served your purpose. Now you are just another mouth to feed. Ray looked up. The arrogance was gone. In its place was the desperate rat-like fear of a man realizing the trap has closed around his neck. She promised me, he whispered. She said we would be a family. She promised to love, honor, and cherish me too. Ray, I said. Look how that turned out. Ray chugged the rest of his scotch. He slammed the glass down. That bwitch. She is playing me. She is playing everyone I said, but she is playing you for a fool. She used my money to keep you quiet, to keep you on the hook until the boys were 18. Now they are adults. She doesn't need you to sign anything. She doesn't need your permission to take them. Ray looked at me. His eyes were wild. What do you want, Zeke? You want to kill me? Go ahead. I got nothing left. I don't want to kill you, Ray, I said. I want to buy you. Ray blinked. What? I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. I pulled out one of the gold bars. I placed it on the table. It landed with a heavy, dull thud that rattled the glass. Gold, I said. Untraceable. Liquid. Ray stared at the gold. He reached out and touched it, his fingers trembling. I have more, I said. I have enough to set you up in a country where Vanessa can't find you. Enough to start over. Or enough to drink yourself to death in style. I don't care which. What do I have to do? Ray asked, his eyes glued to the gold. I want the truth, I said. I want it on video. I want you to sit in front of a camera and tell the world exactly what you and Vanessa did. I want you to tell them about the paternity fraud. I want you to tell them about the fake abuse allegations. I want you to tell them about the plan to drive me to a heart attack. Ray hesitated. If I do that, I go back to jail. Conspiracy. Fraud. Not if you turn state's evidence, I said. My lawyer can cut a deal. Immunity for testimony. You give us Vanessa, you give us her mother, and you walk. You walk with the gold. Ray looked at the gold. He looked at the flight itinerary to Paris that did not bear his name. He looked at the photo of the young blonde he was trying to impress. He was a grifter. He had no code. He had no loyalty. He only understood leverage and profit. Vanessa had made the mistake of thinking she owned him. I knew you could only rent a man like Ray. Make it 2 bars, Ray said, his voice raspy. 2 bars and a plane ticket to Thailand. I signaled to Brad. Brad walked over carrying the iron lunchbox. He set it on the table and opened it. The golden glow illuminated Ray's greedy, desperate face. Done, I said. Ray reached for the box, but I slammed the lid shut on his fingers. He yelped. First, I said, leaning in close. We go to your apartment, the one my wife pays for. We set up the camera. You talk. You spill every drop of poison you have stored up for 18 years. And then, and only then, do you get the gold. Ray rubbed his hand. He looked at me with a mixture of fear and respect. You are a cold son of a bitch, Zeke, he said. I stood up. My hips screamed, but I didn't feel it. I felt light. I felt the structural integrity of my life returning steel beam by steel beam. I learned from the best, I said. I gestured to the door. After you, Ray. We have a movie to make. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the morning air crisp and cold, the kind of cold that settles deep in your bones and reminds you of every injury you have ever sustained. It was November 12th, a Tuesday. But on my calendar, it had been circled in red ink for 18 years. It was the twins' 18th birthday. In the state of Georgia, 18 is the magic number. It is the threshold of adulthood. It is the day a child becomes a man in the eyes of the law. It is the day they can vote, they can enlist, and they can sign legal documents without parental consent. I sat in my rental car, a nondescript gray sedan that smelled of stale cigarettes, parked across the street from the gates of St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. I had paid the tuition here for 12 years, $40,000 a year times 2 for 12 years. I had built the gymnasium, I had endowed the science wing. My name was on a brass plaque in the hallway. But today, I was trespassing. Today I was a ghost haunting the grounds of his own investment. I reached into the passenger seat and touched the 2 small velvet boxes I had placed there. Inside were 2 vintage Rolex watches, my grandfather's and my own. I had planned to give them to Dante and Darius today. I had planned a dinner. I had planned a speech about responsibility and time and legacy. Now those watches felt heavy like lead weights dragging me down into a sea of regret. I saw the bell ring. A flood of young men in navy blazers and khaki pants streamed out of the brick buildings. They were laughing, shoving each other, full of the boundless energy of youth. I scanned the crowd, my eyes aching. And then I saw him. Dante. He was walking with a group of friends, his head thrown back in laughter. He looked so much like... Well, I used to think he looked like me when I was young. But now with the veil lifted, I saw Ray Miller. I saw the set of the shoulders. I saw the way he walked, a little too swaggering, a little too loose. I opened the car door. My hip protested, a sharp reminder of the night Dante had shoved me to the floor, but I ignored it. I had to try, one last time. I had to look him in the eye, man to man, and offer him a lifeline before I cut the rope. Dante, I called out. He stopped. The laughter died on his lips. He turned slowly, his friends quieting down around him. When he saw me standing there, leaning on my cane, his face did not light up. It twisted. It contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He said something to his friends, and they stepped back, forming a circle, a coliseum for our public execution. "What are you doing here?" Dante asked, his voice loud, carrying across the courtyard. "You are not supposed to be here. There is a restraining order." I took a step forward. "I am not at the house, Dante. I am on public property. I just wanted to say happy birthday. I have something for you." I reached into my pocket for the velvet box. Dante flinched. He took a step back, his eyes wide with a performance of fear that he must have learned from his mother. "He has a weapon!" Dante screamed. The air froze. Every head in the courtyard turned. Security guards, burly men I had paid Christmas bonuses to for years, started running toward us. "He is stalking me," Dante yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. "Get away from me! You are not my father!" The words were like shrapnel. They tore through the last layer of my defense. "He is harassing me," Dante shouted to the approaching guards. "Get him away, Mr. Freeman," one of the guards said, slowing down as he recognized me. "Sir, you need to leave. We do not want any trouble." I looked at the guard. I looked at Dante. My son. The boy I had taught to ride a bike in this very parking lot. He was looking at me with hatred, not anger. Hatred. "Dante," I said, my voice low and steady, "I am offering you a choice, right now. You can walk away from her lies. You can be your own man. I do not want your choice." "Old man," Dante spat, "I want you dead." A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, screeching to a halt. The passenger door flew open. Vanessa stepped out. She was wearing sunglasses and a fur coat, looking like a movie star in a tragedy of her own making. She did not look scared. She looked triumphant. She walked past the security guards, her heels clicking on the pavement. She walked right up to Dante and put a protective arm around him, glaring at me like a lioness defending her cub. "You are violating the order, Isaiah," she hissed. "I have the police on speed dial." I looked at her. I looked at the son she had corrupted. "I just wanted to give them their birthday gifts," I said, holding up the boxes. "We do not want your gifts," Vanessa said. "We do not want your money. Well, we want your money, but we do not want you." She reached into her designer bag and pulled out a document. It was legal size, crisp and white. She thrust it toward me. "Happy birthday, Zeke," she said, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "The boys signed this morning. First thing." I took the paper. My hands were shaking just a little. I looked at the header. Petition for termination of parental rights and voluntary disavowal of paternity. I scanned the text. It was a legal declaration stating that Dante and Darius Freeman wished to sever all legal and familial ties with Isaiah Freeman. It stated that they wished to change their surname to Miller. It stated that they acknowledged Ray Miller as their biological and psychological father. Signed Dante Miller. Signed Darius Miller. The signatures were bold, confident. They had not hesitated. "They know," Vanessa whispered, leaning in close so only I could hear. "They know everything. I told them last night. I told them about Ray." I looked up at her, stunned. "You told them?" "Of course I did," she said, laughing softly. "And do you know what? They were relieved. They were happy." She looked at Dante, who was smirking at me. "They always thought you were too old," Vanessa said. "Too boring, too strict. Always talking about hard work and integrity. Ray is cool. Ray has stories. Ray is a rebel. They want to be like Ray. They chose him, Zeke. They chose the cool dad over the meal ticket." She stepped back, linking her arm with Dante. "They chose their real blood," she said, "and it is not you." I looked at Dante. "Is this true?" I asked. "You chose Ray Miller. A man who has never bought you a sandwich. A man who has been in prison." Dante crossed his arms. "Ray is real," he said. "You are just a bank account. And now that we are 18, we do not need to pretend anymore. We are taking the money, and we are taking our real name. Miller." Something inside me snapped. It was not a violent snap. It was a quiet final severance. It was the sound of a cable being cut, releasing a heavy load into the deep ocean. The grief vanished. The nostalgia evaporated. The love I had held for 18 years, the love that had fueled my work, my sacrifice, my patience. It simply went out like a candle in a hurricane. I looked at the young man standing in front of me. I studied his face. I looked for my son. I did not find him. I found a stranger. I found a stranger who shared the DNA of a con artist and the morality of a thief. He was not my son. He never had been. He was just a tenant I had been evicting for too long. I nodded slowly. I folded the document and placed it in my breast pocket right next to my heart. "Okay," I said. Vanessa frowned. She had expected screaming. She had expected tears. She did not know what to do with acceptance. "Okay," she repeated. "You are right," I said. My voice was different. It was the voice I used when I fired a contractor for cutting corners. It was the voice of business. It was the voice of consequences. "If you are not my sons," I said, looking from Dante to Vanessa, "then I do not owe you a father's mercy." I turned to the security guard. "I am leaving. I have no business with these people." I turned my back on them. I walked to my rental car. "He is crazy," Dante yelled after me, trying to regain the upper hand. "He is senile." I did not look back. I got into the car. I placed the velvet boxes on the passenger seat. I would sell them tomorrow, or melt them down. It didn't matter. I started the engine and drove away from the school. I did not feel sad. I felt light. I felt unburdened. For 18 years I had been carrying the weight of a family on my back. Now I was free. I picked up my phone and dialed Brad. He answered on the first ring. "Zeke, did you see him?" "I saw him," I said. "And he is dead." "Brad, Dante Freeman is dead. I just met Dante Miller." There was a silence on the line. Brad understood. "What do we do?" Brad asked. "Execute Plan B," I said. My voice was cold, flat, efficient. "Plan B," Brad asked. "Are you sure that is the nuclear option, Zeke? That destroys everything. The reputation, the school, the social standing. There is no coming back from Plan B." I looked at the road ahead. I saw the city skyline. I saw the structures I had built. They were strong. They were honest. They stood tall because they were built on truth. My family was built on a lie, and lies do not deserve to stand. "Do it," I commanded. "Destroy it all. Release the Ray tapes. Send the files to the district attorney. Send the files to the school board. Cut the tuition checks. Cancel the insurance. Evict the tenants. Zeke. Scorch the earth." "Brad," I said, If they want to be Millers, let them live like Millers. Let them see what life is like when the bank account is closed and the only thing they have to eat is their coolness. I hung up the phone. I drove toward the highway. The sun was shining now, bright and harsh. It illuminated everything. There were no more shadows, no more secrets. I was Isaiah Freeman. I was 75 years old, and I was about to show my ex-wife and her children exactly what happens when you bite the hand that feeds you. You starve. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale air, a scent I associated with bankruptcy hearings and contract disputes. Today, however, the contract in dispute was my life. I shuffled into the preliminary hearing like a man made of dust and brittle bones. I leaned heavily on my cane, letting my hand tremble just enough to be noticeable but not enough to look theatrical. I wore a suit that was 10 years old and slightly too big for me now that the stress had carved 10 pounds off my frame. I wanted them to see a relic. I wanted them to see a man whose mind was eroding like a sandstone cliff in a gale. Vanessa sat at the plaintiff's table. She looked radiant. She wore a cream-colored suit that screamed modesty but whispered money. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore no jewelry except for a small cross necklace I had never seen before. She was playing the role of the long-suffering wife, the saint who had cared for the tyrant until she could take no more. Her lawyer Miller sat next to her, tapping his pen on a legal pad, radiating the impatience of a man who has a tea time at 3 o'clock. My lawyer Sloan sat next to me. Sloan was a shark in a three-piece suit. He was silent, still, and lethal. We had rehearsed this. He knew the script. All rise, the bailiff droned. Judge Harrison entered. He was a man I knew by reputation, fair but impatient. He looked over his glasses at me, and I saw pity in his eyes. That was good. Pity is a blindfold, Mr. Miller, the judge said. You may proceed with your opening regarding the temporary support orders. Miller stood up. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the center of the room and gestured toward me as if I were a piece of rotting furniture. Your Honor, Miller began, his voice smooth and practiced. We are here today because my client, Mrs. Freeman, has been left destitute. Her husband, a man worth an estimated $10 million, has cut off her access to marital funds. He is engaged in a campaign of financial terror. We are asking for immediate relief. We are asking for $50,000 a month in temporary spousal support, and we are asking for a preliminary ruling that 50% of the estate is hers by right of contribution. 50%. $5 million. I cupped my ear and leaned toward Sloan, whispering loudly enough for the judge to hear. What did he say? $50? Miller rolled his eyes. He sighed a theatrical exhale meant to show the judge what he had to deal with. 50,000, Mr. Freeman Miller said, speaking slowly as if to a child. And half the assets. I slumped back in my chair, looking confused. Half, but I built the company. She never came to the office. Sloan patted my arm gently. It is okay, Isaiah. Let me handle it. The judge watched this interaction. He saw a confused old man being comforted by his attorney. He saw exactly what we wanted him to see. Miller called Vanessa to the stand. She walked up, took the oath, and sat down. She looked at me for a split second, and in that glance, the mask slipped. I saw the greed. I saw the triumph. She thought she was looking at a corpse. Mrs. Freeman Miller said, "Please tell the court about your role in the marriage." Vanessa took a deep breath. Her voice was soft, trembling, just the right amount. I devoted my life to him, she said. When we met, he was lonely. He was working himself to death. I made a home for him. I raised our sons. I managed the household. I supported him emotionally so he could focus on his work. Everything we built together. I sacrificed my own career, my own dreams to be his rock. Lies, all of it. She had hired nannies. She had hired housekeepers. She had spent her days shopping and her nights planning my demise. But under oath, her lies became a record. And the fidelity Miller asked, "Was that a cornerstone of your marriage?" Vanessa nodded, wiping a non-existent tear. "Absolutely, I was faithful to him every single day for 18 years, even when he became difficult. Even when he became distant. I honored my vows, I loved him. I only wanted to be his wife. I watched her. I listened to the perjury flow out of her mouth like poisoned water. She was confident. She had gotten away with it for so long that she believed she was untouchable. She believed the narrative she had constructed. She believed I was the villain. Miller sat down looking satisfied. He thought he had just painted a masterpiece. "Mr. Sloan," the judge asked. Sloan stood up. He did not take any notes with him. He walked toward the witness stand. He did not look aggressive. He looked curious. Mrs. Freeman, Sloan said, "You stated that you have been completely honest with your husband throughout the duration of your marriage. Is that correct?" "Yes," Vanessa said, lifting her chin. "We had no secrets. And you stated that this marriage, this union with Mr. Freeman, was a partnership built on trust and mutual contribution." "Yes. And you believe that entitles you to half of his life's work." "It is our work," she corrected him sharpish. "And yes, the law is clear." Sloan nodded. He walked back to our table and picked up a single piece of paper. He did not look at it, he just held it. "You mentioned sacrifice, Mrs. Freeman. You mentioned that you gave your youth to Mr. Freeman." "I did," she said. "I was 24 when we married. I gave him the best years of my life." Sloan paused. He looked at the ceiling, then he looked at her. "Mrs. Freeman, before you met Isaiah Freeman, before you became the devoted wife you claimed to be, what was your life like?" Vanessa blinked. "It was normal. I was a student. I was working in retail. I was waiting for my life to begin." "I see," Sloan said. "And in that time before Isaiah, were there any other significant relationships?" Vanessa hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Her eyes flicked to Miller, then back to Sloan. "No, just boyfriends. Nothing serious." "Nothing serious," Sloan repeated. "So to be clear, and I want to remind you that you are under oath and that perjury is a felony in this state." Miller stood up. "Objection. Counsel is badgering the witness." "Overruled," the judge said, leaning forward. He sensed the shift in the air. Sloan continued, his voice dropping, becoming intimate, deadly. "Mrs. Freeman, have you ever been married to anyone other than Isaiah Freeman?" The courtroom went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I watched Vanessa's throat work as she swallowed. I saw the calculation behind her eyes. She was thinking about Ray. She was thinking about the 18 years of silence. She was thinking about the money she had paid to keep the past buried. She looked at me. I was staring at the table, picking at a loose thread on my jacket, looking like I didn't know what day it was. She decided I was harmless. She decided Ray was bought and paid for. She decided she was safe. "No," Vanessa said clearly. Her voice rang out in the quiet room. "I have never been married to anyone else. Isaiah was my first and only husband." Sloan smiled. It was a terrifying expression. It was the smile of a predator who has just felt the trap snap shut on the prey's leg. He did not produce the marriage certificate from Las Vegas. He did not produce the divorce records that did not exist. He did not produce the deposition from Ray Miller that we had recorded 2 days ago. Not yet. That was for the trial. That was for the destruction phase. Today was just about setting the hook. "Thank you, Mrs. Freeman," Sloan said. "No further questions at this time." Vanessa looked confused. She had expected a fight. She had expected him to bring up her spending or the alleged abuse. She did not understand why he had asked such a simple, irrelevant question. She stepped down from the stand and walked back to her table, smoothing her skirt, shooting a triumphant look at Miller. Miller looked confused too, but he shrugged it off. He stood up. "Your Honor, given the testimony, we ask that you grant the temporary support order immediately. Mrs. Freeman has expenses." The judge looked at Sloan. "Mr. Sloan, do you have any witnesses or evidence to present regarding the temporary order?" Sloan looked at me. I stopped picking at my jacket. I looked up. I locked eyes with Sloan and gave him a nearly imperceptible nod. "Your Honor," Sloan said, "we do have evidence, substantial evidence. However, given the nature of the plaintiff's testimony today, we would like to request a 48-hour continuance to authenticate certain documents that directly contradict the sworn statements we just heard. We believe these documents will fundamentally alter the jurisdiction of this court regarding the division of assets." Miller scoffed. "Delay tactics, Your Honor. The old man is stalling. He just wants to starve her out." The judge looked at Sloan. "Fundamentally alter the jurisdiction. That is a bold claim, Counselor. It is a bold case." "Your Honor," Sloan said. The judge looked at me. I was no longer looking at the table. I was looking at Vanessa. I dropped the act. I straightened my spine. I lifted my chin. The tremor in my hand vanished. The confusion in my eyes evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard stare of a structural engineer who has identified the critical failure point in a building. I looked at Vanessa with absolute clarity. I let her see the intelligence she had forgotten I possessed. I let her see the memory of the man who had survived the Jim Crow South, the man who had built skyscrapers, the man who did not break. Her eyes widened. She froze. She saw the change. She saw the wolf shed the sheepskin. The blood drained from her face. She grabbed Miller's arm, her fingernails digging into his expensive suit. "Miller," she whispered, her voice carrying in the silent room. "Why is he looking at me like that?" The judge banged his gavel. "Recess," he declared. "We will reconvene in 48 hours. Mr. Sloan, you better have something good." "We do, Your Honor," Sloan said. I stood up. I did not use the cane. I picked it up and held it like a weapon. I buttoned my jacket. Miller was packing his briefcase, looking annoyed. Vanessa was staring at me, paralyzed by a sudden primal fear. She knew. Deep down in her gut, she knew she had missed something. She knew the check she had just written with her mouth was about to bounce. I walked past their table. I did not stop. But as I passed, I leaned in close to Vanessa. "You should have looked at page 3, I whispered. "What?" she gasped. "The envelope," I said. "The one I gave Miller." "You never opened it, did you? You were so arrogant you thought you didn't need to read my warning." Miller looked up. "What are you talking about?" "Ask your client about Las Vegas, Miller," I said to him. "Ask her about the year 2002, and ask her why she thinks she is entitled to half my money when she is still legally married to Ray Miller." Miller dropped his pen. His mouth fell open. He looked at Vanessa. Vanessa made a sound like a dying animal, a whimper of pure terror. I walked out of the courtroom. The heavy doors swung shut behind me with a sound like a tomb ceiling. I walked down the marble hallway, my footsteps echoing strong and steady. I had them. They were trapped in the amber of their own lies. And in 48 hours, I was going to smash it with a hammer. I took out my phone. I dialed Brad. "Is Ray ready?" I asked. "He is ready," Brad said. "He is in the safe house. He is singing like a canary." "Good," I said. "Get the popcorn, Brad. The show is about to start." The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock at night. It was not a polite ring. It was a long, insistent press that demanded attention. I was sitting in my daughter Keisha's living room, the black binder open on my lap, a glass of water on the side table. Brad looked up from his computer monitor, his hand instinctively going to the concealed holster at his waist. I shook my head. We did not need guns for this. We just needed the truth. "Let her in," I said. Brad walked to the door and opened it. Betty stood there. My mother-in-law. She was wearing a fur coat that I had paid for 3 Christmases ago and holding a designer bag that cost more than the first car I ever bought. Her hair was perfectly coiffed, a helmet of gray curls, but her eyes were darting around the room like a trapped animal looking for a vent. She walked in without waiting for an invitation, bringing a gust of cold air and the smell of expensive, desperate perfume with her. She stopped in the middle of the room and looked at me. She did not look at Keisha. She did not look at Brad. She looked only at the man she had been leeching off for nearly 2 decades. "Isaiah," she said, her voice attempting a tone of reasonable authority that cracked around the edges. "We need to stop this. It has gone too far." I closed the binder slowly. I looked at her. I saw the fear behind the makeup. She had heard about the courtroom. She had heard about the question regarding Las Vegas. She knew the walls were closing in, and like a rat on a sinking ship, she was looking for the highest ground. "Sit down, Betty," I said. She did not sit. She stood tall, clutching her bag with white knuckles. "I am not here to socialize," she said. "I am here to offer you a deal. You drop this nonsense about the annulment. You drop the investigation. You give Vanessa the house and $5 million. In exchange, we will let you see the boys. We will not press charges for the assault on Dante. We will let you walk away with your reputation intact." I laughed. It was a dry, rasping sound that hurt my chest. "My reputation?" I asked. "You mean the reputation you and your daughter are currently destroying on Facebook?" Betty took a step forward, her face hardening. "You do not understand, Isaiah. You think you have leverage because of some old paperwork. Please. The court loves a mother, and the court hates an angry, controlling husband. If you do not agree to these terms tonight, by tomorrow morning, the narrative changes." She lowered her voice, turning it into a weapon. "Vanessa is prepared to speak about the abuse, Isaiah. Not just the yelling, the physical abuse, the nights you came home drunk, the bruises she had to hide with makeup. I stared at her. I had never been drunk a day in my life. I had never raised a hand to a woman. I was a man who built shelters, not a man who destroyed them. There were no bruises, Betty, I said quietly, except the ones you painted on her face 2 nights ago. Betty didn't flinch. She smiled, a cruel, thin stretching of her lips. Who are they going to believe, she asked. A beautiful crying mother of 2, or a 75-year-old man with a history of heart trouble and a sudden violent streak? We will ruin you, Isaiah. We will make sure you die alone in a cell branded a monster. The church will turn its back on you. Your business partners will drop you. You will have nothing. I looked at Brad. He was standing by the television, the remote in his hand. He looked at me, waiting for the signal. I looked back at Betty. I looked at the woman who had sat at my Thanksgiving table for 18 years. I looked at the woman who had held my hand at my first wife funeral, pretending to comfort me while calculating my net worth. You are right, Betty, I said. The truth matters. But you have the wrong truth. I nodded at Brad. Brad pointed the remote at the large flat-screen television on the wall. The screen flickered to life. It was not a camera feed from my house this time. It was a recording. Grainy, low-light footage time-stamped 3 weeks ago. The scene was a basement. Smoke hung heavy in the air. Men and women sat around green felt tables, their faces illuminated by hanging lamps. It was an underground casino, an illegal gambling den in the back of a warehouse in the industrial district. And there, right in the center of the frame, was Betty. She was not wearing the fur coat. She was wearing a tracksuit, a cigarette dangling from her lip, her eyes manic and focused. She was shoving stacks of chips into the center of the table. Betty gasped. She took a step back, her hand flying to her mouth. Where did you get that? She whispered. I have friends in low places, Betty, I said. Friends I made before I had money. Friends who know who walks through their doors. On the screen, the dealer turned a card. Betty slammed her fist on the table. She swept the chips away. She reached into her purse, the same designer purse she was holding now, and pulled out a thick envelope of cash. She threw it on the table. That is $10,000, I said, narrating the scene in one hand. The video cut to another angle. Betty was arguing with a man in a cheap suit. She was crying. She was begging. That was 2 months ago, I said. You lost $50,000 that night. The video cut again. Betty handing a man a watch. My watch. A Patek Philippe I thought I had lost a year ago. I stood up. I walked toward her. She shrank back, hitting the wall. $500,000, Betty, I said, my voice rising. That is how much you have lost in the last 3 years. $500,000. That is why Vanessa was stealing from me. That is why she was draining the Cayman account. It wasn't for clothes. It wasn't for trips. It was to feed the black hole of your addiction. You are a junkie, Betty. You are a gambling junkie who dragged her daughter into a life of crime to cover your debts. Betty was shaking. Her face was gray. It is a sickness, she stammered. I need help. You needed help, I corrected her. What you did was steal. That money belonged to Structural Dynamics. It belonged to the IRS. It belonged to me. You laundered stolen funds through an illegal casino. That is a federal crime, Betty. That is 20 years in prison. Turn it off, she screamed, covering her ears. Turn it off! Brad muted the TV, but he left the image of her desperate face frozen on the screen. I am not done, I said. I walked back to the coffee table. I picked up a manila folder. It was old, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. It smelled of dust and secrets. The gambling is bad, Betty, I said, but we can almost understand greed. We can almost understand addiction. But this, I held up the folder. This is something else entirely. Betty looked at the folder. She didn't recognize it. Why would she? She thought she had burned it 30 years ago. What is that? She whispered. This is a medical record from a private clinic in Savannah, Georgia, I said, dated 30 years ago. Before Vanessa, before Ray, before me. I opened the folder. I pulled out a birth certificate and a bill of sale, not a legal adoption paper, a bill of sale, handwritten. 30 years ago, you had a son, Betty, I said. A boy. You were young. You were broke. You had a gambling problem even then, and you met a couple who couldn't conceive. a rich couple from up north who didn't want to wait for the agencies. Betty's eyes rolled back in her head. She slumped, sliding down the wall until she was crouching on the floor, her fur coat pooling around her like a dead animal. "No," she moaned. "No one knows that. Everyone is dead." "I am alive," I said, "and the boy is alive." I pulled out a photograph, a current one. It showed a man of 30. He looked kind. He looked strong. He looked nothing like the woman cowering on the floor. "His name is Marcus," I said. "I found him, Betty. Brad found him. We told him who his mother was. We told him how much she sold him for. $10,000. That was the price of your flesh and blood. That was the stake for your poker game in 1994. He is here in the city," I said mercilessly. "He is willing to testify. He is willing to take a DNA test. He is willing to tell the court about the woman who sold him like a used car so she could hit the slots in Atlantic City." Betty began to sob. It was a guttural, ugly sound, the sound of a soul being ripped open. "Please, Isaiah," she begged, reaching out a trembling hand to grab the hem of my robe. "Please don't. That will destroy me. That will kill me. I will do anything. I will make Vanessa stop. I will make her sign the papers. Just bury this, please." I looked down at her. I saw the tears cutting tracks through her foundation. I saw the expensive jewelry bought with stolen money. I saw the architect of my misery. She was the one who had whispered in Vanessa's ear for 18 years. She was the one who had taught her daughter that men were wallets and children were leverage. She was the rot in the floorboards. "It is too late for deals, Betty," I said. My voice was as cold as the wind outside. "You threatened to ruin my reputation. You threatened to brand me an abuser. You tried to take my life's work." I pulled my robe away from her grasp. "You are the architect of this tragedy, Betty. You drew the blueprints. You laid the foundation. And now you are going to be the first one buried in the rubble." I looked at Brad. "Send the gambling footage to the IRS and the district attorney," I commanded. "And send the file on Marcus to the media." "No," Betty shrieked, trying to stand up, clawing at the air. "Get out of my daughter's house," I said. Brad stepped forward. He grabbed Betty by the arm none too gently and hauled her to her feet. She was wailing incoherent pleas for mercy that fell on deaf ears. "You fall first, Betty," I said, looking her in the eye one last time. "And when you hit the bottom, tell Vanessa her turn is coming." Brad marched her to the door and threw her out into the night. He slammed the door and locked it. The silence that followed was heavy, but it was clean. I sat back down. My hands were shaking just a little, not from fear, from the exertion of demolition. Keisha sat next to me. She took my hand. "You really found him?" she asked softly. "The son," I nodded. "He is a good man, a teacher. He deserves to know the truth, and she deserves to face it." I looked at the black binder. The list of enemies was getting shorter. Betty was broken. Ray was bought. Now there was only Vanessa, and the two boys who had broken my heart. "Tomorrow," I said, staring at the blank television screen. "Tomorrow we take the house back." It was 10 o'clock at night when the motion sensors in the driveway of my former home triggered an alert on Brad's server. We were back in the war room, the three of us huddled around the glow of the monitors like generals watching a drone strike. I held a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, my eyes fixed on the screen. The feed from the exterior camera showed a beat-up sedan screeching into the driveway, hopping the curb and crushing the azaleas I had planted 10 years ago. The driver's door flew open and Ray Miller stumbled out. He looked different than he had in the bar 2 nights ago. The slick, confident grifter was gone. In his place was a man unraveling at the seams. His shirt was untucked, his hair wild, and he moved with the jerky, frantic energy of a man whose chemical courage was turning into chemical paranoia. He did not knock. He pounded on the heavy oak door with both fists, screaming something the microphone picked up as a garbled roar. Brad reached for his phone. I did not have to tell him what to do. He dialed 911, his voice calm and professional. "Yes, I would like to report a violent disturbance at 4200 Oak Street. A man is attempting to break down the door. He appears armed and under the influence. Yes, there are children inside." Brad hung up and looked at me. "The police response time in that neighborhood is less than 7 minutes. 7 minutes, I said, watching Ray kick the door. A lot of damage can happen in 7 minutes. On the screen, the door opened. Vanessa stood there wearing a silk robe, looking terrified. She tried to block the entrance, but Ray shoved past her, nearly knocking her into the foyer table. "Switch to camera 1, I commanded. The view changed to the living room. The room was perfectly staged the way Vanessa always kept it, like a museum exhibit rather than a home. Dante and Darius were sitting on the couch playing video games, their faces illuminated by the blue light of the television. They looked up startled as their biological father stormed into the room like a hurricane of cheap liquor and bad intentions. "Where is it?" Ray screamed, spinning around to face Vanessa. "Where is my money?" Vanessa closed the door and ran after him, trying to hush him. "Ray, please, not now. The boys are here. Keep your voice down." "I do not care about the boys," Ray yelled, grabbing a crystal vase from the mantel, a vase I had bought in Prague, and hurling it against the wall. It shattered with a sound like a gunshot. "I want my cut, Vanessa. You said if I signed the papers, if I played the part, I would get 50,000 cash up front." Vanessa was shaking. Her hands were fluttering in the air, trying to calm a rabid dog with gestures. "I cannot get it yet, Ray. The accounts are frozen." The old man locked everything down. "I told you we have to wait for the court hearing." Ray laughed, a high, manic sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Wait. I cannot wait. I owe people money. Vanessa. Serious people. They are not going to wait for a judge to bang a gavel." He marched over to the entertainment center. He grabbed the PlayStation console the twins had been using and ripped the cords out of the wall. "Hey," Dante shouted, jumping up. "That is mine." Ray turned on him. The boy, my boy I had thought for 18 years, towered over Ray. Dante was 6'2", a linebacker, strong and athletic, but he shrank back when he saw the look in Ray's eyes. It was the look of a man who had nothing left to lose. "Sit down," Ray roared, advancing on Dante. "You think you are tough. You think you are a man. You are nothing. You are a prop." Dante looked at his mother, confusion and fear warring on his face. "Mom, what is he talking about? Why is he acting like this?" This was the cool dad. This was the rebel. This was the man they had chosen over me because I was too boring, too strict, too old. Now they were seeing the reality of their choice. They were seeing the difference between a father who builds a foundation and a donor who burns the house down. "Ray, stop it!" Vanessa screamed, grabbing his arm. "You are scaring them! Get off me!" Ray shoved her. Vanessa stumbled back and fell onto the sofa next to Darius. Darius didn't move. He was frozen, staring at Ray with wide, terrified eyes. Ray turned back to Vanessa. "You promised me $1 million, he spat, pacing the room like a caged tiger. "You said, help me get rid of the old N-word, help me get the kids to sign the papers and we will be rich." Well, I did my part. I signed the birth certificates. I played the long-lost daddy. Now pay me. The racial slur hung in the air, ugly and sharp. I saw Dante flinch. I saw Darius look down at his hands. They had grown up black men in a white world protected by my money and my status. Now they were hearing what their biological father really thought of the man who raised them. "I do not have it," Vanessa wailed. "I told you he knows Ray, he knows about us, he knows about Georgia." Ray stopped pacing. He stared at her, his chest heaving. "He knows." He handed my lawyer an envelope. Vanessa sobbed. "He knows everything. He is going to ruin us." Ray's face went pale, then red. A vein bulged in his neck. "You stupid woman," he hissed. "You said he was stupid. You said he was just a senile old engineer who didn't know how to check a bank statement. You said this was a slam dunk." He grabbed a lamp and smashed it on the floor. "If I go back to jail because of you, I am taking you with me. Do you hear me? I will burn this whole place down." In the distance, faint but growing louder, I heard the sirens. Brad checked his watch. 4 minutes. Dante stood up again, trying to regain some shred of dignity. "Get out of our house, Ray." Ray spun around. He looked at Dante with pure contempt. "Your house," Ray sneered. "This ain't your house, boy. This is the old man's house. You don't own a brick of this place. And you don't own me. You think I came back because I missed you. You think I care about your football games or your grades?" Ray walked right up to Dante and poked him hard in the chest. "I came back because your mother told me you were worth $1 million apiece in child support and inheritance. You are just a paycheck kid, a paycheck that is bouncing." Dante looked like he had been punched. The illusion of the cool, loving biological father evaporated in seconds, replaced by the stench of greed and stale whiskey. "Mom," Dante whispered, looking at Vanessa. "Is that true?" Vanessa didn't answer. She just wept, curling into a ball on the sofa. The sirens were loud now, right outside the house. Blue and red lights flashed through the front window, washing the room in the same chaotic colors that had illuminated my eviction 2 nights ago. Ray looked at the window. Panic replaced the rage. "You called the cops," he shouted at Vanessa. "You set me up, I didn't," Vanessa cried. I swear, Ray didn't believe her. He looked around for a weapon. He grabbed a heavy bronze statue from the side table. The front door burst open. I watched on the screen as 3 police officers swarmed into the hallway, guns drawn. "Police, drop the weapon. Get on the ground." Ray hesitated. For a second, I thought he was going to charge them. I thought he was going to force them to shoot him right there in my living room in front of the boys. "Drop it," the lead officer screamed. Ray dropped the statue. It hit the floor with a heavy thud, denting the hardwood I had installed myself. He raised his hands, his face twisting into a mask of pathetic fear. "Don't shoot," he yelled. "I am unarmed. Get on your knees. Hands behind your head." 2 officers moved in, forcing Ray to the ground. They cuffed him roughly, his face pressed against the floorboards. Vanessa stood up, wiping her face, trying to compose herself, trying to salvage the situation. "Officers, thank God you are here. This man," he broke in, "he is crazy. I don't know him. He—" "Liar," Ray screamed from the floor, struggling against the cuffs. "She is lying. She knows me. I am her husband." The officers paused. One of them looked at Vanessa. "Ma'am, he is delusional." Vanessa shrieked, her voice cracking. "He is a stalker. I am the father of those kids." Ray yelled, desperate to hurt her as much as she had hurt him. "Ask them. Ask the twins. And ask her about the money. She promised me $1 million of that old black man's money if I helped her act. She hired me. It is a conspiracy. She is trying to steal his estate." The room went silent. The police officer looked at Ray, then at Vanessa, then at the twins. Dante and Darius were staring at their mother. They looked at the woman who had told them I was a monster. They looked at the woman who had told them Ray was a hero, and they saw the truth written in her terrified eyes. "Is that true?" the officer asked Ray. "You were saying this was a setup." "Check her phone," Ray shouted. "Check her texts. It is all there. The plan. The fake abuse. The doctor she tried to bribe. I will tell you everything. Just get me a deal. She is the mastermind. I am just the pawn." Vanessa lunged at him, her nails aiming for his eyes. "Shut up, Ray. Shut up." An officer grabbed Vanessa, restraining her. "Ma'am, step back. You are arresting the wrong person," Vanessa screamed, struggling against the officer's grip. "He is a junkie. You cannot believe him." "We will sort it out at the station," the officer said. He spoke into his radio. "Dispatch, we have 1 subject in custody, possible domestic dispute. We are going to need a transport, and send a detective. We have allegations of conspiracy and fraud." Brad tapped the keyboard. He saved the video file. He synced the audio from the hidden microphones. "We got it," Brad said quietly. "We got the confession. We got the motive. We got the betrayal." I watched the screen. Ray was being hauled to his feet, still shouting accusations. Vanessa was hyperventilating, realizing that her house of cards had not just fallen, it had caught fire. And in the middle of the chaos stood Dante and Darius. They were not moving. They were not speaking. They looked lost. They looked like 2 little boys who had woken up in a nightmare and realized the monsters were their own parents. Dante looked at the camera. He didn't know it was there, hidden behind the vent, but he looked right at it. His eyes were filled with tears. He looked around the room, searching for safety, searching for stability. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the dining table, visible through the archway. My chair. He realized finally that the only person who had ever truly protected him, the only person who had ever truly loved him without conditions, was the man he had shoved to the floor 2 nights ago. I watched my son, no, not my son, Ray's son, crumble. He sat down on the floor, put his head in his hands, and began to sob. I reached out and touched the screen. I felt a pang of pity, sharp and deep, but I pushed it away. Pity was dangerous. Pity was what got me into this mess 18 years ago. "You see that?" I said to Brad, pointing at the weeping boy. "I see it, Zeke. That is the sound of a lesson being learned," I said. "It is a hard lesson, but it is the only one that sticks." I stood up and turned away from the monitors. "Send the footage to the district attorney," I said, "and send a copy to Miller, Vanessa's lawyer. Tell him I hope he got a retainer up front because his client is about to have her assets seized by the federal government." "We are done here tonight," I said. I walked out of the war room and went to the guest bedroom. I lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling. I listened to the silence of the house. It was over. The trap had sprung, the enemy was captured, but as I closed my eyes, I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. And I wondered if a man of 75 could ever really build a home again, or if I was destined to just be the caretaker of the ruins. The guillotine did not fall on a neck. It fell on a tuition ledger. It was Wednesday morning, 48 hours after Ray Miller was dragged out of my house in handcuffs. I sat in Brad's war room sipping black coffee, watching the digital notifications roll in like casualty reports from a distant front line. Transaction declined, St. Jude's Preparatory Academy. Amount $40,000. Transaction declined, Shell gas station. Amount $50. Transaction declined, Starbucks. Amount $12. I had cut the cord. I had severed the financial artery that kept the twins alive in their bubble of privilege. I imagined the scene at the school. The dean of students, a man who shook my hand every Christmas, walking into AP history. The whisper in the ear. The public walk of shame to the administrative office. The polite but firm explanation that until the arrears were cleared, Dante and Darius Miller no longer. Freemen were persona non grata. They would have tried to use their credit cards. They would have tried to buy lunch or gas or a distraction, and they would have heard that beep, that terrible flat electronic tone that tells you that you are no longer a member of the club. I did not feel joy. I felt a grim satisfaction, like a surgeon amputating a gangrenous limb. It had to be done to save the body, even if the limb was lost forever. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the twins were back at the house on Oak Street. They didn't have cars. I had repossessed the leases that morning. They had taken the bus. I watched them on the security feed trudge up the driveway. They looked smaller than they had 2 days ago. Their blazers were unbuttoned, their ties loose. They looked like refugees from a country that no longer existed. They unlocked the door and went inside. I switched the feed to the kitchen camera. Vanessa was there. She was pacing the island, a phone pressed to her ear, a glass of wine in her hand. She looked haggard. The makeup didn't quite cover the stress lines. She was arguing with her criminal defense lawyer, trying to find bail money for Ray, trying to stop the seizure of her assets. "I told you I don't have access," she screamed into the phone. The old man froze. Everything. "You have to do something, sell the jewelry. I don't care." Dante and Darius walked into the kitchen. They threw their backpacks on the floor. The sound made Vanessa jump. She spun around, her eyes wild. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, lowering the phone. "Why aren't you at school? They kicked us out," Dante said, his voice flat. "They said the tuition check bounced. They said we can't come back until it is paid." Vanessa let out a screech of frustration. She hung up the phone and slammed it onto the granite counter. "Great," she muttered. "Just great. That is one more thing I have to deal with," Mom, Darius said, stepping forward. His voice was trembling. "My card didn't work. I couldn't buy lunch. We are hungry." Vanessa looked at them. For 18 years she had pampered them. She had bought them whatever they wanted to keep them on her side, to use them as anchors to keep me tethered. But now the anchors were dragging her down. Now that I was gone, now that the money was gone, the mask of the loving mother was slipping. She looked at these 2 6-foot-tall young men, and she didn't see her sons. She saw 2 more mouths to feed. She saw 2 more problems she couldn't afford. Hungry, she laughed a shrill, hysterical sound. "You are hungry. I am facing 20 years in prison. Ray is in jail. The FBI is seizing my accounts. And you are whining about lunch." "Mom, we need gas money," Dante said, ignoring her outburst. "We need to get back to school tomorrow. You have to fix this." "Fix it," Vanessa shouted. She grabbed a ceramic bowl from the counter and hurled it into the sink. It shattered. "Fix it yourself. You are 18. You are men. You wanted to be Millers. Well, welcome to the Miller lifestyle. It means you are broke." She advanced on them, poking Dante in the chest with a manicured fingernail. "You are useless," she hissed. "Both of you. I spent 18 years pretending to be a mother, pretending to care about your football games and your stupid grades, all so we could get the payout. And now you are nothing but dead weight." Darius stepped back, his eyes wide with shock. "Mom, you don't mean that." "Don't I?" Vanessa sneered. She walked over to the refrigerator and yanked it open. It was mostly empty. The delivery service had been canceled too. "Look at this," she yelled. "No food, no money. And do you know why? Because you couldn't keep your mouth shut. You had to shove him. You had to make him angry. If you had just played the game a little longer, we would have the inheritance." She slammed the fridge door. "If you want money, get a job," she spat. "Go flip burgers. Go dig ditches. I don't care. But don't you dare ask me for a dime. I need every cent I can scrape together to stay out of prison." She stormed out of the kitchen, grabbing a bottle of wine as she went. "Get out of my face," she screamed over her shoulder. "If you aren't bringing money into this house, you are taking up space." The twins stood in the silence of the kitchen. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. They looked at each other. The shock was absolute. The woman who had told them they were princes, who had told them they were better than me, had just looked them in the eye and called them parasites. Dante sank onto a bar stool. He put his head in his hands. Darius looked around the room as if seeing it for the first time. He looked at the expensive appliances, the marble countertops, the trappings of a wealth they had never earned and now could not access. He walked over to the desk in the corner of the kitchen. This was Vanessa's command center, where she paid bills and organized her social calendar. He started opening drawers, looking for cash, looking for anything. "What are you doing?" Dante asked dully. "Looking for money," Darius said. "She keeps emergency cash in here." He pulled out a stack of papers. No cash, just bills, final notices, threatening letters from lawyers, and at the bottom of the stack, a leather-bound notebook. Darius opened it. It was Vanessa's journal. She had always been diligent about writing. She said it helped her center herself. Darius started reading. He froze. "What is it?" Dante asked. Darius didn't answer. He just kept reading, his face turning an ashy gray. He walked over to Dante and placed the book on the counter. "Read this," Darius whispered. I zoomed in with the camera, but I couldn't read the text. I didn't need to. I knew Vanessa. I knew what was in her heart. Dante read aloud, his voice shaking. "November 10th, 2 days before the birthday. I can't wait until this is over. I am so sick of playing the doting mother. These boys are exhausting. They are loud, entitled, and stupid, just like Ray. As soon as the old man kicks the bucket and the money transfers, I am shipping them off. Maybe military school. Maybe just kick them out. I don't care. I want to live in Paris alone. They are heavy luggage. I am cutting them loose the second the check clears." Dante stopped reading. He stared at the page. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was his mother's loop, elegant script. "Heavy luggage," Dante whispered. "That is what we are. Luggage." He looked at Darius. They shared a look of profound, earth-shattering realization. It was the look of two people who realize the ground they have been standing on is actually a trap door, Dad Darius said. The word felt strange in the air. "Not Ray. Zeke." Dante nodded slowly. "Dad, he was the one. He was the one who came to the games. He was the one who checked the homework. He was the one who put the money in the college fund. And we assaulted him." Darius said, tears welling in his eyes. "We disowned him. We chose the people who hate us over the person who loved us." They stood there for a long time. The silence in the house was heavy, suffocating. They realized they were alone, truly alone. The mother they worshipped was a monster. The biological father they idolized was a felon. And the father they rejected was gone. "Let's go," Dante said, standing up. Where Darius asked. "To apologize," Dante said. "To beg. It is the only chance we have." They grabbed their backpacks. They didn't take anything else. They walked out of the house, leaving the door unlocked, leaving the shattered bowl in the sink. They walked back out into the cold afternoon. I watched them go. I turned off the monitor. I sat in the darkness of Brad's study. My heart was a stone in my chest. I wanted to feel vindicated. I wanted to feel triumphant. But all I felt was a deep, aching sadness for the time that was lost and the innocence that had been slaughtered. An hour later, the intercom at Keisha's gate buzzed. Brad looked at the monitor. "It is them, Zeke. They are at the gate. It is raining again. They are soaking wet." I looked at the screen. Dante and Darius were standing in the rain, shivering. They looked like lost children. They looked like the boys I had raised. "Please," I heard Dante's voice over the speaker. "Please let us in. We need to talk to Dad. We need to see Zeke. Please, we are sorry. We read the journal. We know everything. We are sorry." Keisha looked at me. Her eyes were red. "Daddy." I stood up. My hip hurt. My heart hurt. I walked to the intercom panel on the wall. I pressed the button. They could not see me, but I could see them. I could see the hope in their eyes when the speaker crackled to life. "Dad," Dante asked, his voice breaking. "Is that you? Dad, please open the gate. We have nowhere to go. Mom, she hates us. Ray is crazy. You were right. You were right about everything. I took a deep breath. I thought about the 18 years. I thought about the birthday parties. I thought about the pride I felt when they learned to walk. But then I thought about the court papers. I thought about the restraining order. I thought about the signature on the document disavowing me. They were 18. They were men, and men have to live with their choices. I leaned into the microphone. Go home, boys, I said. My voice was not angry. It was just final. Dad, please, Darius cried. We are sorry. You are not my sons, I said. You signed the papers. You made the choice. You wanted to be Millers. Go be Millers. But we have no money, Dante yelled. We have no food. Then work, I said, like I did, like your grandfather did. Build something, earn it. Dad, don't do this. I am not your father, I said. And you are not my children. You are strangers who broke into my house and assaulted me. I looked at their wet faces on the screen. I felt a tear roll down my own cheek, but my voice did not waver. Trust is a mirror, boys, I said. Once it is broken, you can glue it back together, but you will always see the cracks. And I do not want to look at my reflection in a cracked mirror for the rest of my life. I released the button. Zeke Dante screamed, "Open the gate!" I turned away from the panel. I walked back to my chair. I sat down and picked up my book. Turn off the sound, Brad, I said softly. Brad pressed a button. The screaming stopped. The room was silent. On the screen, the boys stood in the rain for another 10 minutes. They pounded on the gate. They cried. And then finally defeated, they turned and walked away, disappearing into the gray mist of the city. I did not watch them go. I stared at the page of my book, the words swimming before my eyes. I had scorched the earth. I had destroyed the enemy. But as I sat there in the silence, I realized that when you burn down a house to kill the termites, you still end up standing in the ashes. The courtroom was a theater of mahogany and silence, a stage set for the final act of a tragedy that had been running for 18 years. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands resting on the cool wood, feeling the weight of the moment settling into the marrow of my bones. I wore my best suit, a charcoal gray three-piece that I had bought in London 10 years ago. I did not look like the confused, shuffling old man I had portrayed at the preliminary hearing. Today, I looked like Isaiah Freeman. I looked like the man who built bridges across rivers that people said could not be spanned. I looked like a man who knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were and exactly how to bring them down. Vanessa sat across the aisle. She had dressed for the part of the grieving, long-suffering wife. She wore a modest navy blue dress with a high collar, her hair pulled back in a severe bun that highlighted the delicate bones of her face. She wore no makeup, save for a touch of powder to make her skin look pale fragile. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue every time the judge looked her way. She was confident. I could see it in the set of her shoulders. She believed the law was a weapon designed for women like her, a shield to protect her from the consequences of her own greed. She believed that because she was the mother, because she was the wife, because she was younger, the gavel would fall in her favor. Her lawyer Miller looked bored. He was already spending the contingency fee in his head. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his pen, shooting me looks of pity that were really just veiled contempt. He thought he was dissecting a carcass. He did not know he was poking a sleeping lion. My lawyer Sloan was a statue. He sat perfectly still, his eyes fixed on the judge. On the table in front of him sat a single thick binder. It was not black, it was red. The color of warning, the color of blood. All rise, the bailiff announced, his voice booming off the paneled walls. Judge Harrison entered. He was a stern man with a face carved from granite, a man who had seen every lie a human being could tell. He sat down, adjusted his robes, and looked over his spectacles at the packed courtroom. The gallery was full. Friends of Vanessa. Neighbors who had believed her Facebook posts. A few reporters who smelled a scandal involving a prominent businessman. We are here for the matter of Freeman versus Freeman, the judge said. Mr. Miller, you may call your first witness. Miller stood up, buttoning his jacket with a flourish. The plaintiff calls Vanessa Freeman to the stand. Vanessa walked to the witness box. Her steps were small, hesitant. She looked like a woman walking to the gallows, not realizing she was the executioner. She took the oath. her voice trembling just enough to be convincing. Mrs. Freeman Miller began, his voice soft, almost a whisper. "Tell the court why we are here today. Why are you seeking a divorce and full control of the marital assets?" Vanessa took a deep breath. She looked at me and then quickly looked away as if the sight of me was too painful to bear. "I love my husband," she began, her voice gaining strength. "I have loved him for 18 years. I gave him everything. I gave him my youth. I gave him 2 beautiful sons. I gave him a home. But..." She paused, wiping a tear that had managed to squeeze itself out. "But he has changed. He has become cruel, controlling. The man I married is gone, replaced by someone who hurts me, someone who hurts our children." She looked at the judge, her eyes wide and pleading. "I am not doing this for me. Your Honor, I am doing this for Dante and Darius. They deserve a home where they are not afraid. They deserve security. My husband, he has cut us off. He has left us with nothing. He has locked us out of our own home. I am just asking for what is fair. I am asking for my share of the life we built together." Miller nodded, looking solemn. "And the assets, Mrs. Freeman. The business. The properties. I supported him while he built that company." She lied seamlessly. "I managed the household so he could work. We were partners. Everything he has, we earned together. It is only right that half of it should go to me and the boys. It was a masterful performance. If I did not know the truth, if I did not have the receipts, I might have believed her myself." She painted a picture of a partnership that never existed, of a love that was a transaction from day one. Miller sat down, looking satisfied. He thought he had just secured a $10 million judgment. "Mr. Sloan," the judge asked. Sloan stood up. He did not rush. He walked to the lectern, placing his hands on the sides. He looked at Vanessa. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. "Mrs. Freeman," Sloan said, his voice level. "You spoke eloquently about the sanctity of your marriage. You spoke about partnership, about trust." "Yes," Vanessa said, lifting her chin. "Trust is everything to me. And you stated under oath in your deposition, and again just now, that Isaiah Freeman was your husband, your partner, the man to whom you pledged your life." "He is my husband," she said sharply. "That is why I am entitled to the assets." Sloan nodded slowly. He picked up a piece of paper from the red binder. "Mrs. Freeman, is it your testimony that when you married Isaiah Freeman 18 years ago, you entered into that union in good faith, that you were legally free and able to marry him?" Vanessa frowned. A flicker of confusion crossed her face. "Of course. I was single. I had never been married before. Isaiah was my first husband." "Your first husband," Sloan repeated. He let the words hang in the air. "And your only husband," Vanessa rolled her eyes. "Yes, obviously." Sloan walked toward the witness stand. He held the piece of paper in his hand, but he kept it close to his chest. "Do you know a man named Ray Miller?" Sloan asked. The air left the room. It was subtle, a shift in pressure that popped the ears. Vanessa froze. Her hand, which had been dabbing her eye, stopped in midair. Her pupils dilated. The color that had been artfully applied to her cheeks seemed to drain away, leaving her gray and ashen. I know him," she stammered. "He is an acquaintance." "An acquaintance," Sloan said. Interesting choice of words. Because according to the Clark County Clerk in Las Vegas, Nevada, Ray Miller is not your acquaintance. Sloan whipped the paper around and placed it on the ledge of the witness box. "This is a certified copy of a marriage license dated June 4th, 2002. It lists the groom as Raymond Thomas Miller, and it lists the bride as Vanessa Marie Johnson. That is your maiden name, is it not?" Vanessa stared at the paper. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if her vocal cords had been severed. Miller, her lawyer, jumped up. "Objection, relevance. This is ancient history. It is not history." "Your Honor," Sloan's voice boomed, cutting through the lawyer's protest. "It is the present." Sloan turned back to Vanessa. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a growl. "Mrs. Freeman, did you ever divorce Ray Miller?" Vanessa looked at the gallery. She looked at Miller. She looked at me. Her eyes were wild, darting like a trapped animal. She was doing the math. She was trying to remember the paperwork, the filings, the details she had paid to bury. We broke up," she whispered. "Years ago, before I met Isaiah." "Breaking up is not a divorce," Mrs. Freeman, Sloan said. "We have searched the records in Nevada. We have searched the records in Georgia. We have searched the records in every state you have ever lived in. There is no decree of dissolution. There is no divorce decree. Sloan turned to the judge. Your Honor, at the time the plaintiff married my client, she was still legally married to Ray Miller. She is still legally married to Ray Miller today. The gallery erupted. A collective gasp swept through the room like a wave. People leaned forward, whispering, pointing. The judge banged his gavel, his face a mask of thunderous shock. Order! Order in this court, Judge Harrison shouted. He looked at Vanessa. Mrs. Freeman, is this true? Are you married to another man? Vanessa was shaking. Her hands gripped the railing of the witness box so hard her knuckles were white. It was a mistake, she cried out, her voice shrill and desperate. We were kids. We were drunk in Vegas. It didn't mean anything. We never lived together. I thought it was annulled. I thought it didn't count. What you thought does not matter, Sloan said coldly. What matters is the law. And the law says you cannot have two husbands. Sloan walked back to his table and picked up another document. A legal brief. Your Honor, this constitutes bigamy. It is a felony. But more importantly, for these proceedings, it renders the marriage between Vanessa Johnson and Isaiah Freeman void ab initio. Void ab initio. The Latin phrase hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Void from the beginning. It means Your Honor. Sloan continued looking at Vanessa with a mixture of pity and disgust that legally this marriage never happened. There is no marital estate. There is no community property. There are no assets to divide. Vanessa let out a scream. It wasn't a scream of sorrow. It was a scream of a woman watching $10 million burn to ash in front of her eyes. No, she shrieked, standing up in the witness box. That is not fair. I lived with him for 18 years. I raised those kids. I am his wife. You cannot just erase me. You erased yourself, Sloan said. You committed fraud. You entered into a contract under false pretenses. You have no claim to Isaiah Freeman's property because you were never Isaiah Freeman's wife. You were just his mistress. Miller, the lawyer, slumped into his chair. He put his head in his hands. He knew the law. He knew it was over. He knew he had just wasted 6 months on a case that was dead on arrival. Vanessa looked at me. She looked across the aisle at the man she had tormented, the man she had planned to kill with stress, the man she had tried to banish from his own home. I sat there calm and still. I looked back at her. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I just looked at her with the cold, dead eyes of a man who has finally cleared the rubble from his life. You knew, she whispered, her voice trembling with rage and disbelief. You knew all along. That envelope, page 3. I nodded slowly. You set me up, she screamed, lunging over the railing. You old bastard. You let me think I was winning. You let me spend the money. You let me make a fool of myself. Sit down, the judge roared. Bailiff, restrain the witness. The bailiff moved forward, placing a heavy hand on Vanessa's shoulder, forcing her back into the seat. She was sobbing now, ugly heaving sobs of a woman who realizes she has gambled everything and lost. Your Honor, Sloan said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Since there is no marriage, there is no divorce case. We move to dismiss all claims for alimony, asset division, and spousal support with prejudice. Furthermore, we will be filing a separate civil suit for fraud restitution of all funds spent during the 18 years of this fraudulent union and emotional damages. Vanessa looked up, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Restitution, she choked out. Every penny, Vanessa, I said. I spoke for the first time. My voice was low, but in the silence of the stunned courtroom, it carried to the back row. I want every penny back. The cars, the clothes, the jewelry, the tuition, the house. It was never yours. You were a guest in my life, a guest who overstayed her welcome. Judge Harrison looked at the papers. He looked at the marriage license. He looked at Vanessa. Motion to dismiss is granted, the judge said, his gavel coming down with a finality that shook the floor. The marriage is declared void. The temporary support orders are vacated immediately. Mrs. Freeman, or rather Mrs. Miller, you are ordered to vacate the property on Oak Street by 5:00 p.m. today. Vanessa looked at me. Her eyes were empty holes. The entitlement was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollow realization of total ruin. But the boys, she whispered. You can't leave the boys with nothing. They are your sons. Sloan cleared his throat. He looked at the judge. Your Honor, there is one more matter regarding the children. I looked at Vanessa. I saw the flicker of hope in her eyes. She thought she still had one card to play. She thought she could use the twins as leverage. She thought paternity would save her. She didn't know about the second envelope in the red binder. She didn't know about Ray's deposition. She didn't know that the destruction had only just begun. Not today, I whispered to myself. Let her sit with this. Let her sit in the ashes of her marriage for a day before I take the children too. Sloan closed the binder. We will address the matter of paternity in a separate filing, Your Honor. For today, we are done. I stood up. I buttoned my jacket. I picked up my cane. I walked toward the exit. Vanessa was still sitting in the witness box, frozen, staring at the space where her future used to be. Miller was packing his bag, avoiding her gaze. The gallery was buzzing, the sound of 100 people witnessing a public execution. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright hallway. I took a deep breath. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like justice. I checked my phone. There was a message from Brad. Ray is in custody. He just gave the DA everything. I smiled. The foundation was gone. The walls had fallen. Now all that was left was to sweep up the debris. The courtroom vibrated with the aftershock of the gavel. Void ab initio. The Latin phrase hung in the air like smoke from a controlled demolition. It meant that legally the marriage had never existed. It meant that for 18 years I had been cohabiting with a stranger. It meant Vanessa had no claim to my house, my pension, or the company I built from the ground up. But the war was not over. Vanessa was cornered, and a cornered animal does not surrender. It attacks the softest target available. I saw her lean in to whisper to Miller. Her face was pale, stripped of the arrogant glow she had worn just an hour ago, but her eyes were hard. She was playing her last card. Miller stood up. He looked tired. He looked like a man who realized his contingency fee had just evaporated, but he had a professional obligation to go down with the ship. Your Honor, Miller said, his voice lacking its previous boom. While the court has ruled on the validity of the marriage, there remains the issue of the children, Dante and Darius Freeman. He gestured to the empty air where the twins would have been if they hadn't been banned from the courthouse for their own protection. Mr. Freeman has acted in loco parentis for 18 years, Miller argued, finding his rhythm. He is the only father they have ever known. He signed their birth certificates. He raised them. Regardless of the biological reality or the marital status, he has assumed the role of father. We move for full child support retroactive to the filing date and continued maintenance for their education and lifestyle. These boys are innocent victims, Your Honor. They should not be punished for the sins of the mother. It was a good argument. In a normal world, it might have worked. It relied on the idea that I was a man of honor who would not abandon children I had raised. But Miller did not know about the document in my pocket. He did not know about the scene in the school parking lot. Sloan did not even stand up fully. He just leaned into the microphone. Your Honor, Sloan said, his voice dry. The plaintiff speaks of fatherhood. He speaks of obligations. Sloan opened the red binder again. He pulled out a document with a blue seal. We agree that the truth is the only currency that matters in this court, Sloan said. And the truth is that my client has supported these young men for 18 years based on a fraudulent representation of paternity. Vanessa sat up straighter. He is their father, she shouted from her seat. In every way that matters. Is he? Sloan asked. He held up the document. This is a DNA paternity test conducted pursuant to the court order granted 48 hours ago. The samples were collected from Dante and Darius Miller, formerly Freeman. Miller jumped up. Objection. My client never consented to a DNA test for the children. The children are 18, Mr. Miller. Sloan cut him off, his voice sharpening to a razor edge. They are adults. They consented. In fact, they were quite eager to provide samples. They believed it would prove their claim to the estate. Sloan walked the document to the bailiff. The results are conclusive, Your Honor. The probability of paternity is 0%. Isaiah Freeman is excluded as the biological father of Dante and Darius. The judge took the document. He adjusted his glasses. He read it once, then looked up at me. His expression was unreadable, a mask of judicial neutrality cracking under the weight of the deception. Mrs. Freeman, or rather Mrs. Johnson, the judge said, looking at Vanessa. Did you know this? Vanessa froze. Her mouth opened and closed. She looked at Miller, who was staring at his shoes. I thought, she stammered. It was a possibility, but Isaiah, he accepted them. He accepted them because you told him they were his, Sloan roared. It was the first time he had raised his voice in the entire trial, and it cracked through the room like a whip. You lied to him about the pregnancy. You lied to him about the conception. You committed paternity fraud for 18 years to secure a lifestyle. He owes them, Miller squeaked, trying to salvage something. He raised them. He owes them nothing, Sloan said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Because the fraud vitiates the consent. He did not agree to raise another man's children. He was tricked into it. And since the marriage is void and there is no biological link, there is no legal obligation. The gravy train has derailed, Mr. Miller. The tracks are gone. Vanessa let out a wail. It wasn't a cry of heartbreak. It was the sound of a vault door slamming shut. It wasn't supposed to be like this. I did it for them. I wanted them to have a good life. Did you? Sloan asked. He walked over to the AV cart. Or did you do it for the payday? I did it because I loved him, she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. I loved Isaiah. The DNA doesn't matter. Sloan nodded. He pressed a button on the remote. The screen descended. If you loved him, Sloan said, then perhaps you can explain this. The lights dimmed. The video began to play. It was high definition. The audio was crisp. It showed Ray Miller sitting in a chair in a safe house holding a glass of water. He looked sober. He looked terrified. State your name, my voice said from off camera. Ray Miller. And your relationship to Vanessa Johnson? She is my wife. We married in Vegas in 2002. And the twins, they are my sons, biologically mine. The courtroom gasped, a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Vanessa put her hands over her ears, shaking her head violently. Tell us the plan, Ray, my voice commanded on the tape. Ray looked at the camera. He looked like a man confessing his sins before the executioner. Vanessa came to me in 2005, Ray said. I just got out of prison. We were broke. She met this guy, an engineer, older, rich, black. She said he was lonely. She said he wanted a legacy. Ray paused, licking his dry lips. She said if she got pregnant, he would marry her. He wouldn't ask for a prenup. He would be so happy to have heirs he wouldn't ask questions. So, we tried. She got pregnant, with twins. And then... She told him they were his, Ray said. She called it the retirement plan. She said the old man was just a bank account with a heartbeat. She said we just had to wait 18 years. Then she would divorce him, take half the money, and we would all be together. We would be a family again, with his money. The video ended. The screen went black. The silence was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb where the truth had just been exhumed. Judge Harrison looked at Vanessa. His face was twisted in disgust. Mrs. Johnson, he said, this court has seen many things. But this is a level of depravity that shocks the conscience. Vanessa stood up. She was shaking so hard her chair rattled against the floor. Her eyes were wild, darting around the room, looking for an exit, looking for a weapon. He made me do it, she screamed, pointing at the blank screen. Ray made me. I was afraid of him. Lies, Sloan said calmly. We have the emails. We have the journal entries. You were the architect, Vanessa. Ray was just the bricklayer. Vanessa turned to me. Her face contorted into a mask of pure, distilled hate. The grieving wife was gone. The mother was gone. Only the predator remained. You knew, she shrieked. She lunged across the aisle. She threw herself over the barrier separating the tables, her hands clawing for my face. You knew all along, you old bastard. You let me play this game. You let me think I was winning. You gaffed me. Bailiffs rushed forward. They grabbed her arms. She kicked and screamed, her designer shoes flying off her hair, coming loose from its severe bun. You tricked me. She yelled, spit flying from her mouth. You watched me. You recorded me. You are the monster. You set me up. Restrain the witness, Judge Harrison shouted, banging his gavel. I stood up. I watched the woman I had slept next to for 18 years being wrestled back by two large men. She was panting, her chest heaving, her eyes locked on mine. I signaled for the bailiffs to wait. I looked at the judge. "May I speak, Your Honor?" I asked. The judge nodded. "Briefly, Mr. Freeman." I walked around the table. I stood in the open space between us. I leaned on my cane, not for support, but to ground myself. I looked into her eyes. I saw the fear, I saw the rage, but mostly I saw the hollowness. "I did not know all along, Vanessa," I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried to every corner of the room. "For 18 years I believed you. I believed in us. I woke up every morning and thanked God for giving me a family. I overlooked the spending. I overlooked the coldness. I told myself that love was enough to bridge the gap." I took a step closer. "I waited, Vanessa. I waited for 18 years. I waited for the day you would look at me and see a husband, not a mark. I waited for the day you would look at those boys and see sons, not lottery tickets. I waited for you to become a decent person." I shook my head slowly. "But you didn't. You chose to be a devil. You chose to sell your soul for a lifestyle you didn't earn. And you chose to sell my heart for parts. You ruined my life." She sobbed, struggling against the guards. "No," I said. "I just turned on the lights. You are the one who hates what she sees in the mirror." I turned my back on her. I walked back to my table. "I am done, Your Honor," I said. "Get her out of here," the judge ordered. The bailiffs dragged Vanessa out of the courtroom. Her screams echoed down the hallway, a fading siren song of greed and regret. I sat down next to Sloan. He closed the red binder. "It is over, Zeke," he whispered. I looked at the empty witness stand. I looked at the stunned faces in the gallery. I looked at Miller, who was packing his briefcase with the speed of a man fleeing a burning building. It was not over. Not yet. There was still the matter of the house. There was still the matter of the boys. But the foundation was gone. The walls had fallen. The roof had collapsed. And for the first time in 18 years, I could see the sky. The gavel struck the sounding block not with a bang, but with the dull, heavy thud of a coffin lid falling into place. The sound resonated in the hollow of my chest, vibrating against the ribs that had shielded a broken heart for too long. Judge Harrison did not look at Vanessa. He did not look at her lawyer Miller, who was slumped in his chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. He looked at the paperwork before him, his face a mask of judicial fury contained by centuries of precedent. "In the matter of Freeman versus Freeman," the judge began, his voice low and gravelly, filling the silent courtroom. "This court finds that the plaintiff Vanessa Johnson entered into a marriage contract with the defendant Isaiah Freeman, while fully cognizant of a pre-existing and undissolved legal union with one Raymond Miller." Vanessa let out a whimper, a small, wounded sound that was swallowed by the enormity of the room. She was gripping the table, her knuckles white, her expensive manicure digging into the wood. Therefore, the judge continued, relentless as a tide, "This court declares the marriage between Isaiah Freeman and Vanessa Johnson void ab initio. It is a nullity. In the eyes of the law, it never existed. There is no marital estate. There is no community property. There is no spousal support." Miller tried to stand, perhaps out of habit, perhaps out of a last shred of professional dignity, to object, but he sank back down. He knew there was nothing to say. The video of Ray Miller confessing to the conspiracy was still burned into the retinas of everyone in the room. However, the judge said, raising his eyes to look directly at Vanessa, "This court cannot ignore the egregious nature of the fraud perpetrated here. This was not a simple clerical error. This was a calculated, decades-long enterprise designed to defraud Mr. Freeman of his assets, his emotional labor, and his life." Vanessa was shaking her head, muttering to herself. No, it was love. It was love." The judge ignored her. Based on the evidence presented, specifically the financial records detailing the misappropriation of funds, the fraudulent credit lines, and the systematic looting of Mr. Freeman's accounts under the guise of a marital partnership that did not exist, this court is taking extraordinary measures. He turned a page in his file. Since there was no marriage, Vanessa Johnson had no legal right to access Mr. Freeman's funds for her personal benefit, nor for the benefit of her biological children with Mr. Miller. Every dollar spent was theft. Every check written was fraud. Vanessa looked up, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. It was the terror of a person who realizes that zero is not the bottom. You can go lower than zero. You can go into the negative. "I am ordering full restitution," the judge declared. "Mrs. Johnson is hereby ordered to repay the sum of $5,200,000 to Isaiah Freeman. This figure represents the estimated cost of lifestyle housing, unauthorized transfers, and legal fees incurred over the last 18 years. A lien is hereby placed on any and all assets currently held in her name or held in trust for her effective immediately. $5 million. The number hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It was an impossible sum. It was a life sentence of debt. It meant she would never own anything again. It meant she would never open a bank account, buy a car, or sign a lease without my name shadowing her demanding what was mine. Furthermore, the judge said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming colder, this court is referring this matter to the district attorney office for immediate criminal prosecution. The charges recommended include bigamy, grand larceny, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit fraud. The bailiff moved away from the wall. The doors at the back of the courtroom opened. Vanessa stood up, her chair scraping violently against the floor. "No," she screamed, the sound tearing her throat. "You cannot do this. I am a mother. I have children." The judge banged the gavel again. "Proceed, officers." 2 uniformed officers entered the courtroom. They were not alone. Behind them, flanked by a detective in a cheap suit, walked Betty, my mother-in-law, or rather, the woman who had played that role. She wasn't wearing her fur coat today. She was wearing a tracksuit, her hair messy, her face gray with the ash of defeat. She had been waiting in the hallway, perhaps hoping to testify, perhaps hoping to salvage something. Instead, she had walked right into the net. Mom Vanessa gasped. Betty looked at her daughter. She didn't offer comfort. She looked at Vanessa with the eyes of a drowning woman looking for a buoy. "They know, Vanessa," Betty croaked. "They know about the gambling. They know about the adoption agency in Georgia. They know everything." The officers moved efficiently. They were not gentle. They did not care about the designer clothes or the social standing these women thought they possessed. One officer grabbed Vanessa's wrist, twisting it behind her back. The click of the handcuffs was loud, mechanical, and final. It was the sound of a steel door slamming shut. "Ow, you are hurting me," Vanessa shrieked. She looked at me. Her eyes were wild, her mascara running in black rivers down her pale cheeks. "Isaiah," she screamed, "Isaiah. Please, tell them to stop. I spent 18 years with you. I cooked your meals. I warmed your bed. Does that mean nothing?" I looked at her. I sat comfortably in my chair, my hands resting on the head of my cane. I looked at the woman who had planned to stop my heart with stress. I looked at the woman who had taught another man's sons to hate me. "It means nothing, Vanessa," I said softly, though I knew she couldn't hear me over her own screaming. It was a transaction, and the check bounced. The other officer handcuffed Betty. The older woman didn't scream. She just slumped her legs, giving out, forcing the officer to hold her up. She looked at me, and for a second our eyes met. I saw the recognition of total defeat. She had played the game for 40 years, selling babies, running cons, gambling with other people's money, and she had finally bet against the house and lost. As they dragged Vanessa toward the aisle, she began to thrash. She was losing control, her dignity evaporating like steam. "Dante, Darius," she yelled, looking toward the back of the courtroom. "Help me! Tell them we are a family." I turned in my seat. I hadn't realized they were there. I had thought they were banned, but they must have slipped in during the chaos, sitting in the back row, hidden by the crowd. Dante and Darius, my boys. No Ray's boys. They were sitting side by side, dressed in jeans and hoodies, looking small and young. They watched their mother being manhandled by the police. They watched her face contorted in an ugly mask of greed and fear. They heard the judge call her a thief and a fraud. They looked at her, and then they looked at me. I met their gaze. I didn't look away. I let them see the man they had rejected. I let them see the stability, the strength, the honor they had traded for a lie. Dante looked at his mother, who was now being dragged past him, screaming his name. "Boys, don't let them take me." Dante turned his head. He looked at the wall. He couldn't watch. He couldn't claim her. The shame radiating off him was palpable, a physical heat. Darius put his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking. They turned away from the woman who had created them, and in doing so, they acknowledged the monster she was. They did not look at me again. They knew they had lost the right to that gaze. The doors swung shut behind the screaming women. The silence rushed back into the courtroom, heavy and thick. Judge Harrison took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked like a man who needed a drink. "Court is adjourned," he muttered. Miller, Vanessa's lawyer, stood up. He packed his briefcase in record time. He didn't look at me. He didn't look at Sloan. He practically ran for the exit, eager to distance himself from the radioactive fallout of his client's life. Sloan turned to me. He offered a small professional smile. "It is done, Zeke," he said. The lien is already being filed electronically. We will have the house back by tomorrow. The sheriff will execute the eviction notice on the twins tonight." I nodded. "Good work, Sloan." I stood up. My hip was stiff, but I felt lighter than I had in 20 years. The parasite was gone. The weight was lifted. I walked down the aisle. I walked past the empty benches. I walked past the spot where Dante and Darius were still sitting, frozen in their misery. I stopped for a brief second. I could hear Darius sniffing. I could smell the cheap cologne Dante wore, the same smell that had been in my house the night he shoved me. I could have stopped. I could have put a hand on a shoulder. I could have offered a word of comfort, a bridge back to the life they had lost. The old Isaiah the father would have done that, but the engineer knew better. You do not build on a foundation that has already crumbled. You do not patch a wall that is riddled with rot. You tear it down. You clear the site, you walk away. I tightened my grip on my cane. I looked straight ahead at the double doors leading to the street, to the sunlight, to the rest of my life. I started walking. The tap of my cane on the floor was steady, rhythmic, the sound of a man moving forward. I did not look left. I did not look right. And most importantly, I did not look back. I pushed open the doors and stepped out into the city I had built. The air was cold and clean. I was 75 years old. I was alone. And I was free. The morning sun sat low over the water, painting the surface of the lake in ripples of burnt orange and gold. It was quiet here. The only sounds were the rhythmic lap of the water against the dock and the occasional cry of a heron taking flight from the reeds. I sat in a folding chair at the end of the pier, a fishing rod in my hand, the line disappearing into the dark, cool depths. I wasn't really fishing. I didn't care if I caught anything. I was just breathing. For the first time in 18 years, I was breathing air that wasn't recycled through a ventilation system of lies. It had been a month since the gavel fell. A month since Vanessa was led away in handcuffs, screaming my name like a curse. A month since the house on Oak Street was put on the market, emptied of its ghosts. I was staying in the guest cottage on Keisha's property, a small, sturdy structure built of cedar and stone. It was simple. It was honest. It suited me. I heard the gravel crunch on the driveway long before I saw them. I didn't turn around. I knew who it was. I had been expecting this visit. It was the final loose thread, the last piece of debris that needed to be cleared before the site could be declared safe. Footsteps on the wooden planks of the dock. Hesitant. Heavy. The footsteps of men who were used to walking with swagger but were now learning to walk with shame. I kept my eyes on the bobber floating on the water. Dad, the voice was Dante's, It was smaller than I remembered. Thinner. I slowly reeled in the line. I set the rod down against the railing. I turned my chair around. They stood there, Dante and Darius. My sons. No Ray's sons. They looked like wrecks. Their designer clothes were gone, replaced by cheap denim and flannel that didn't fit quite right. They had lost weight. Their faces were gaunt. The baby fat of privilege melted away by 30 days of reality. They looked tired. They looked hungry. But mostly they looked like Ray. I saw it now clear as day. The set of the eyes, the weak curve of the mouth, the way they stood shifting their weight looking for an angle. It was biology screaming its truth. But layered over that biology were 18 years of my memories. I saw the scar on Darius's chin from when he fell off his bike. I saw the way Dante held his hands, a habit he picked up from watching me work. It was a cruel mosaic, a picture made of two irreconcilable halves. We didn't think you would see us, Darius said, his voice cracking. Aunt Keisha said we shouldn't come, but we had to. I looked at them. I didn't offer them a seat. I didn't offer them a drink. I just looked. What do you want? I asked. My voice was not angry. It was just tired. We want to come home, Dante said. He dropped to his knees on the hard wood of the dock. It was a theatrical gesture, something he must have seen in a movie or learned from his mother. Darius followed suit, kneeling beside his brother. We are sorry, Dad, Dante sobbed. We were stupid. We were brainwashed. Mom, she told us lies. She made us hate you. But we know now. We know she was the monster. Please, Dad. Darius pleaded, tears streaming down his face. Take us back. We don't have anywhere to go. We are sleeping in a shelter. We can't go to school. We have nothing. I looked at these two young men kneeling before me. Part of me, the part that had warmed bottles at 3 in the morning, wanted to reach out. Wanted to pull them up, hug them, tell them it was going to be okay, that I could fix it. I had the money, I could write a check and make the pain go away. That is what I had done for 18 years. I had paved their road with gold so they would never stub their toes. But then I remembered the courtroom. I remembered the signature on the document disavowing me. I remembered the look of disgust on Dante's face when he shoved me to the floor. I remembered them choosing Ray because he was cool. They weren't here because they loved me. They were here because they were cold. They were here because the shelter was hard and the food was bad. They were here because the ATM was broken. "You call me Dad," I said softly. "But a month ago you signed a paper saying I was a stranger. You stood in a parking lot and told me you wanted me dead." "We didn't mean it," Dante cried. "We were confused." "You weren't confused, Dante," I said. "You were arrogant. You thought you had a better offer. You bet on the wrong horse, and now that you have lost, you want the safety net back." I reached into the pocket of my fishing vest. I pulled out 2 white envelopes. They were thick but not heavy. I stood up. My hip twinged, a permanent souvenir of their betrayal. I walked over to them. They looked up at me, hope flaring in their eyes. They thought this was it, the redemption, the check. I handed one envelope to Dante. I handed the other to Darius. "Take them," I said. They tore them open with trembling hands. They pulled out the contents. It wasn't a check for tuition. It wasn't a key to the house. It was a Greyhound bus ticket, one way, to Innocent, Nebraska, and 10 $100 bills. They stared at the money. They stared at the tickets. "What is this?" Darius whispered. "It is a start," I said. "It is more than I had when I was 18. It is more than your biological father ever gave you." "Dad," Dante started. "Stop," I said. The word was sharp like a whip crack. "Do not call me that. I am not your father. Your father is a man named Ray Miller. He is currently sitting in a cell in the county jail, awaiting trial for fraud. If you want a father, go visit him." I pointed to the envelopes in their hands. "That is $1,000. That is enough to get you to Nebraska, rent a room for a month, and buy some work boots. There are jobs there, hard jobs, construction, farming, jobs where nobody cares who your mother was or what kind of car you used to drive." "You are sending us away?" Darius asked, his voice full of disbelief. Like servants." "No," I said. "I am sending you away like men." I looked out at the lake. The sun was higher now, burning off the mist. "For 18 years, I crippled you," I said. "I gave you everything you wanted and nothing you needed. I taught you that money was a right, not a reward. I raised you to be soft, and because you were soft, you were easy for your mother to mold." I looked back at them. "I am giving you the only gift I have left to give. I am giving you the chance to struggle. I am giving you the chance to find out who you are when the name Freeman isn't there to open doors for you. But we are your sons," Dante yelled, standing up, the anger flashing behind the tears. "You can't just throw us away." "I didn't throw you away," I said calmly. "You walked away. You closed the door. I am just locking it." I turned my back on them. I walked back to my chair. I picked up my fishing rod. "Go find Ray," I said over my shoulder, "or go to Nebraska, or go to hell. It is your choice. That is the beauty of being an adult. You get to choose." Dad, Darius screamed. I cast the line back into the water. The plop of the lure hitting the surface was the only sound I acknowledged. "Don't come back," I said to the water. "Don't come back until you have paid your debts. Don't come back until you have built something with your own hands. Don't come back until you can look me in the eye and see a man, not a bank." I heard them standing there for a long time. I heard their breathing. I heard the rustle of the paper envelopes. I knew they were waiting for me to turn around. They were waiting for the Hollywood ending where the old man's heart softens and he gathers them into his arms. But this wasn't a movie. This was a demolition site, and you don't let people play in the rubble. Eventually, I heard the slow, heavy footsteps retreating down the dock. I heard the crunch of gravel as they walked back up the driveway. I heard the silence return to the lake. I sat there alone. My chest felt tight, a physical ache that radiated out to my fingertips. It was the hardest thing I had ever done. Harder than burying my first wife. Harder than building the skyscrapers. Harder than facing Ray in that bar. It was necessary cruelty. It was the only way to save them from themselves. If I took them back now, they would never learn. They would just learn that betrayal carries no cost. They would become Ray. They would become Vanessa. I had to break them to fix them. Or maybe they were just broken and I was just finally accepting that I couldn't put the pieces back together. I watched the bobber dance on the water. A fish was nibbling at the bait. I didn't reel it in. I just watched it. I was alone. I had no wife. I had no sons. I had a daughter who loved me, a son-in-law who respected me, and a fortune I had protected from the wolves. It was enough. It had to be enough. I took a deep breath of the clean, cold air. I was Isaiah Freeman. And I was finally, truly free. The for sale sign in the front yard of the house on Oak Street did not stay up for long. In this market, a custom-built colonial with a structural integrity rating of 100% is a rare find. I sold it to a young couple, a doctor and a teacher, who looked at the high ceilings and the crown molding and saw a future. I looked at the same walls and saw only the past, a museum of 18 years of deception. I walked through the empty rooms one last time before handing over the keys. The movers had taken everything. The furniture was gone. The art was gone. The echoes of Dante and Darius running down the hallway were gone, silenced by the fresh coat of paint I had ordered. I stood in the dining room looking at the spot on the floor where I had fallen, where my hip had slammed against the wood. The scratch was still there, faint but visible, a scar on the house, just like the ache in my joint was a scar on my body. I did not feel sentimental. I felt like a demolition expert walking away from a successful implosion. The dust had settled. The site was cleared. It was time to build something else. I drove away from Oak Street without looking in the rearview mirror. I drove to the courthouse one last time, not for a hearing, but to witness the conclusion of the paperwork. Sloan met me in the lobby. He looked grim but satisfied. "It is done, Zeke," he said, handing me a thick file. "The judgment is finalized, the liens are perfected, and the sentencing hearings are concluded." I opened the file, I read the numbers, I read the years. Vanessa Johnson, formerly Freeman, sentenced to 15 years in a federal penitentiary. The charges were a laundry list of greed wire fraud, bank fraud, identity theft, and bigamy. The judge had shown no mercy. He saw her not as a mother who made a mistake, but as a predator who had hunted a senior citizen for sport. Sloan told me about her final moments in court. She didn't scream this time. She didn't cry. She just sat there stunned, wearing the orange jumpsuit that stripped her of all her pretenses. The expensive makeup was gone, revealing the age she had tried so hard to hide. The designer clothes were gone, replaced by the uniform of the state. She looked small. She looked ordinary. She looked like exactly what she was, a grifter who had run out of road. 15 years. She would be nearly 60 when she got out. Her beauty, the currency she had traded on her entire life, would be gone. Her sons would be men in their 30s. The world would have moved on without her. She would rot in a cell, surrounded by women who didn't care about her social standing or her plans for Paris. She would have a lot of time to think about the $3 million she stole and the man she underestimated. Betty didn't even make it to trial. My mother-in-law, the architect of my misery, the woman who had taught her daughter how to paint bruises and fake tears, died 3 days after her arrest. Brad told me the news. She was in the detention center holding cell waiting for her arraignment. Her lawyer had just delivered the news that Vanessa was facing a 15-year minimum and that the evidence against Betty herself, the gambling, the baby selling, was irrefutable. She had a massive stroke. Her heart, which I had assumed was made of coal, finally gave out under the pressure of her own schemes. She collapsed on the concrete floor of the cell, surrounded by strangers. I did not go to the morgue. I did not send flowers. I did not pay for the funeral. Vanessa was in custody and couldn't arrange it. The twins were destitute and couldn't afford it. Betty was buried by the state in a pauper's grave, a final poetic indignity for a woman who had spent her life chasing luxury at any cost. She died as she lived, gambling with stakes she couldn't cover. And Ray Miller, the biological father, the cool dad. He didn't last 6 months. Prison is a hard place for a man who talks too much and owes too much. Ray had gambling debts on the outside, and it turns out debts follow you inside the walls. Brad heard it from his contacts. Ray had tried to run a hustle in the yard, tried to play the big man. He offended the wrong people. He was found in the showers with a shiv in his ribs. He died alone on a wet tile floor, bleeding out before the guards even noticed. The 3 people who had conspired to destroy me were gone, dead or buried in concrete boxes. The threat was neutralized. The enemy was liquidated. But there was still the matter of the collateral damage, Dante and Darius. I saw them a week after I sold the house. I was driving my Cadillac through the industrial district, heading to the steel yard to check on a materials order for a friend. It was raining a cold gray drizzle that turned the city into a monochrome photograph. I saw them at a bus stop near a construction site. They were wearing neon yellow vests and hard hats that looked too big for them. Their boots were covered in mud. They were eating sandwiches out of plastic bags, huddled under the shelter of the bus stop, shivering. I pulled the car over. I rolled down the window just an inch. I watched them. They looked exhausted. Their faces were thin, the soft edges of privilege honed away by hard labor. Dante had a bruise on his cheek, probably from a piece of rebar or a clumsy swing of a hammer. Darius was rubbing his lower back, a gesture I knew well. They were working. They were digging ditches or hauling concrete. They were doing the kind of work I had done when I was 18, the kind of work that breaks your body if you aren't careful, the kind of work that teaches you the value of $1 because you bleed for every single cent. They didn't see me. They were too busy eating, too busy being tired. They weren't talking. They weren't laughing. The swagger was gone. The arrogance of the private schoolboys who thought they owned the world was gone. In its place was something else, something harder, something real. I watched Dante break his sandwich in half and give a piece to Darius. I watched Darius nod in thanks. They were surviving. They were learning to rely on each other because they had no one else. The safety net was gone. The bank of dad was closed. The cool father was dead. The rich mother was in prison. They were Millers now living a Miller life. I put my hand on the door handle. A part of me, the father part that never really dies, wanted to get out, wanted to call them over, wanted to put them in the warm car and take them to a steak dinner, wanted to write a check for their tuition and say, "It is okay, I forgive you." But I took my hand off the latch. If I saved them now, I would ruin them forever. If I saved them now, they would never learn that actions have consequences. They would go back to being entitled, soft, and ungrateful. They needed this mud. They needed this cold. They needed to know what it felt like to stand on their own 2 feet, even if those feet were blistering in cheap boots. I rolled the window up. I put the car in gear. "Goodbye, boys," I whispered. "Become men." I drove away. I left them in the rain. It was the cruelest, kindest thing I could do. I moved into a townhouse 3 blocks from Keisha and Brad. It was smaller than the mansion, but it was solid. Brick walls, hardwood floors, a fireplace that drew perfectly. It was a home, not a stage set. I spent my days consulting for the firm, taking only the projects that interested me. I spent my evenings having dinner with my daughter and her husband. I watched my grandson play in the yard. I taught him how to hold a hammer. I taught him how to measure twice and cut once. And I did one more thing. I took the money I had recovered from Vanessa, the millions she had tried to steal, the assets the court had seized and returned to me, and I started a foundation, the Isaiah Freeman Scholarship Fund. It was not for my family. It was for kids like I used to be, black kids from the South Side, kids with calloused hands and bright minds who wanted to be engineers, architects, and builders, kids who knew the value of hard work but didn't have the means to get the education they deserved. Every year I selected 10 students. I paid their full tuition. I paid for their books. I paid for their housing. I gave them the start that I had given Dante and Darius, but these kids didn't take it for granted. They looked at me with hunger and gratitude, not entitlement. I met with them once a month. I mentored them. I told them stories about the bridges I built and the mistakes I made. I told them about structural integrity. One afternoon, 5 years after the trial, I was sitting on my porch reading a letter from one of my scholars. He had just graduated top of his class from Georgia Tech. He thanked me for saving his life. He called me a father figure. I put the letter down and looked at the sunset. I was 80 years old. My hips still hurt when it rained. I was alone in the sense that I had no wife, but I was not lonely. I had purged the rot from my life. I had torn down the condemned structure that was my marriage. And on the empty lot, I had planted a garden. It wasn't the legacy I had planned. It wasn't the bloodline I had hoped for. But it was real, it was honest, and it was built to last. I took a sip of my iced tea. I thought about Vanessa in her cell. I thought about the twins in their work boots. I thought about the lie that had almost killed me, and I smiled. I was Isaiah Freeman. I was a builder, and I had finally built a life that could not be shaken. The sun dipped below the tree line, setting the Georgia sky on fire with streaks of violet and burnt orange. It was the kind of sunset that makes you believe in God, or at least in the idea that the day deserves a beautiful funeral. I sat in my rocking chair on the wraparound porch of the townhouse, a blanket draped over my legs to keep the evening chill out of my bad hip. The wood of the chair creaked a slow, rhythmic song back and forth, a metronome keeping time for the final chapter of my life. I was 80 years old. My hair was white as cotton now, and my skin had thinned like old parchment, but my eyes were clear. I looked out onto the lawn. The grass was green and manicured, not because I paid a service, but because Brad cut it every Saturday. He said it helped him think. In the middle of the yard, my daughter Keisha was chasing a toddler, my great-grandson. He was 2 years old, a bundle of energy and laughter named Malik. Brad was sitting on the grass pretending to be a bear, growling playfully as the boy shrieked with delight and ran into Keisha's arms. I watched them. I watched the way Brad looked at Keisha with a steady, quiet adoration that hadn't faded in 20 years. I watched the way Keisha held the boy with a fierce protectiveness that came from her soul, not from an obligation. I watched the family I had almost lost because I was too busy trying to buy a counterfeit version from a woman who hated me. 5 years. It had been 5 years since I walked out of that courtroom. 5 years since I burned the bridges to the island of lies I had lived on. People ask me sometimes if I am lonely. They see an old man living in a guest house without a wife, and they assume I am sad. They assume I miss the big mansion on Oak Street with the crystal chandeliers and the cold marble floors. They assume I miss the noise of a full house. They do not understand the difference between being alone and being at peace. For 18 years, I was the loneliest man on earth, even though I slept next to a woman every night. I was lonely because I was playing a role. I was the provider. I was the bank. I was the mark. I walked on eggshells in my own kitchen, terrified of upsetting the delicate balance of my wife's mood. I bought affection with jewelry and silence. I thought that if I just gave enough, if I just built the walls thick enough, the love would eventually become real. I was a fool. I was a builder who forgot the first rule of engineering. You cannot build a structure on a sinkhole. It does not matter how expensive the materials are. It does not matter how beautiful the design is. If the ground underneath is rotten, the house will fall. I looked at Malik. He didn't share my last name. He didn't share much of my DNA. But when he saw me on the porch, he broke away from his mother and ran toward the steps. Pop, pop. He yelled, his little legs pumping. He climbed the stairs one by one, determined. He ran to my chair and buried his face in my blanket. I put my hand on his head. I felt the warmth of his life. This was real. This was not purchased. I did not have to buy him a car to make him hug me. I did not have to promise him an inheritance to make him smile. He loved me because I gave him cookies and told him stories about the stars. He loved me because I was there. I thought about Dante and Darius. The last I heard, Dante was working on an oil rig in North Dakota. Hard work. Dangerous work. Darius was managing a warehouse in Ohio. They were alive. They were making their own way. They had not called. I had not called them. Do I miss them? Sometimes. I miss the little boys they were. I miss the memory of teaching them to ride bikes, but I do not miss the men they became. Those men were strangers who looked at me with their mother's greedy eyes. I mourn them the way you mourn a character in a movie who dies halfway through. It is sad, but it is not your life. I took a sip of my iced tea. The condensation was cold against my palm. I thought about Vanessa. 15 years. She still had 10 left. I wondered if she thought about me in her cell. I wondered if she regretted the greed or if she only regretted getting caught. I realized with a jolt of satisfaction that I didn't care. Her name was a word in a language I no longer spoke. The anger was gone. That was the biggest surprise of my 80s. I thought I would die angry. I thought the rage would eat me alive like a cancer. But the anger had evaporated the day I sold the house. It washed away with the rain that fell on the bus stop where I left the twins. In its place was clarity. I had spent 18 years watering weeds. I had spent 18 years pouring my resources, my love, my time into people who were incapable of blooming. I had tried to turn thistles into roses by sheer force of will. But for the last 5 years, I had tended a different garden. I had invested in the scholars of my foundation. I had invested in Keisha and Brad. I had invested in myself. I traveled to Italy. I saw the Pantheon. I stood under the dome and marveled at the concrete that had held for 2,000 years because the Romans knew how to mix the aggregate correctly. I learned to cook. I learned to paint. I read all the books I had been too busy to read when I was building my empire. I lived. For the first time since I was a young man, I lived for Isaiah Freeman. Keisha walked up the steps carrying Malik. She sat on the railing, leaning against the post. She looked tired, but happy. "What are you thinking about, Daddy?" she asked. I smiled at her. "I am thinking about structural integrity," I said. She laughed. "You are always thinking about structural integrity. It is the only thing that matters," I said. Brad came up the stairs carrying 2 cold beers. He handed one to me and sat on the bench opposite. He didn't say anything. He just toasted me with the bottle and drank. This was loyalty. Brad, the white man from the suburbs who had hunted down the truth for me, not because I paid him, but because he couldn't stand to see me disrespected. Keisha, the daughter who had warned me, who had been pushed aside, but who opened her door the moment I knocked in the rain. They were my foundation. They were the bedrock. I realized then that the tragedy wasn't that I lost 18 years. The tragedy would have been if I had lost 19. The tragedy would have been if I had died in that house surrounded by vultures waiting to pick my bones clean. I escaped. I survived the collapse, and I built something new from the rubble. The sun was gone now. The fireflies were coming out, blinking their yellow lights in the gathering dusk. I leaned back in my chair. My heart beat steady and strong. The doctor said I had the heart of a man 20 years younger. It turns out when you remove the poison from your life, the body heals itself. I looked at my family, my real family. I realized that revenge isn't about destroying your enemies. I had destroyed them, yes. I had taken their money, their freedom, and their future. But that wasn't the victory. That was just the cleanup. The victory was this. The victory was sitting on a porch, drinking a cold beer, watching a child laugh, and knowing that nobody here was waiting for me to die. The victory was knowing that if I closed my eyes right now and never opened them again, I would be mourned, not liquidated. I put my hand in my pocket and felt the worn texture of the small notebook where I wrote my thoughts. I pulled it out. I wanted to write this down. I wanted to leave this for Malik, for the scholars, for anyone who found themselves standing in the ruins of a life they thought was permanent. I opened the book to a fresh page. I picked up my pen. The ink flowed smoothly, black and permanent against the white paper. I wrote down the sum of my 80 years. I wrote down the truth that had cost me millions of dollars and a broken heart to learn. Loyalty is not a flower that blooms from DNA. It is a tree that grows from the roots of respect and gratitude. I spent 18 years watering weeds, hoping they would turn into roses simply because I gave them my name. I was wrong. A name is just a label. Character is the content. When betrayal sits at your dinner table, do not try to feed it until it changes. Starve it out. The moment you stop tolerating disrespect is the moment your real life begins. Protecting your peace is the highest form of self-love, even if it means walking alone. I spent a lifetime calculating stress loads for steel and concrete, yet I miscalculated the weight of my own worth. I thought providing for people was the same as being loved by them. It is not. You cannot buy loyalty, and you cannot build a home on a foundation of deceit. Sometimes the bravest thing a man can do is not to hold on, but to let go. To strike the match and walk away from the wreckage. Rebuilding from scratch at 75 isn't a tragedy, it's a triumph. Your peace is the only real estate that truly matters. Defend it with everything you have. If you believe that respect is non-negotiable, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about justice and redemption. Let me know in the comments. Would you have forgiven the twins, or did Zeke make the right call?